there's
two.
another one
Yeah,
about
it's
downstairs.
downstairs.
Welcome to the second field hearing of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you to our host, Express Clydesdales, and to Representative Hearn and Representative Lucas for hosting us in your beautiful state. The committee is in Yukon, Oklahoma today to listen to working Americans about how to make life better for their families, neighbors, and communities. Oklahoma is a place where self-reliance and the frontier spirit run deep. Oil, natural gas, and agriculture built Oklahoma. America's heartland is the story of the people who fuel, feed, and build our country. Today, 2/3 of all the energy produced in Oklahoma is exported across the country and the world. The state is the #1 producer of rye, one of the top producers of beef cattle, and it has the 4th largest number of farms in America. And yet, Democrats in Congress and the White House have targeted communities like this one for the heavy hand of government regulation. ESG standards will limit the capital needed to expand Oklahoma's oil and gas leadership and put radical climate and social policies ahead of the retirement security of working families. The president's policies have made life unaffordable for middle-class families. Even here, a state with plentiful energy, diesel prices were 62% higher at their peak than the day Joe Biden became president. Over the last decade, 92 farms in Oklahoma went bankrupt. President Biden, in his budget this week, will want to make it even harder to pass the family farm down to the next generation. He wants to repeal stepped-up basis and increase the death tax, treating family farms like piggy banks to pay for more welfare for the wealthy. When it comes to Oklahoma manufacturing, the prices that producers pay have risen 17% during President Biden's administration. Small businesses can barely make payroll and pay rent with their razor-thin margins. I'm pleased to welcome Brian Jackson, an Iraq veteran and founder of a meatpacking company, Chuck Mills, owner of a family-owned manufacturing company, Kelly Payne, a 5th-generation rancher from Mustang, Oklahoma, Joe Brevetti, a Smile oil producer, and Miss Cantz from Tulsa. In 2 days, President Biden will release his latest budget. If history is our guide, America's heartland should expect a budget that continues Washington's assault on their way of life. Biden's last budget threatened $45 billion in new taxes on American energy producers. It spent $330 billion on policies that discourage work, worsen supply chains, and leaves Main Street littered with help wanted signs. Biden's 25% increase for the EPA would supercharge an agency that thinks it's their business to tell farmers whether a small stream, pond, or farm dust is harming the environment. We must humbly listen to the working Americans who are living under these failed policies so we can chart a better course. For those of you from the community attending today or employees of Express Clydesdales, we also want to hear from you. There will be notebooks and clipboards passed around in the back, and I want to encourage every audience member to please share your experiences and ideas to help us get this country back on the right track. These will be entered into the official hearing record to guide this committee's work. I want to thank our witnesses for taking the time away from their families and busy schedules to be here today, and we look forward to your testimony. I'm pleased to recognize Ranking Member from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Frank, and I want to thank Kevin for their warm welcome to Oklahoma. You're wondering what my interest was in Oklahoma. Any place that produced Mickey Mantle's got to be a great place to be. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for joining with us this morning. President Biden and congressional Democrats, our economic agenda is focused on building the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And the legislation delivered by the Ways and Means Committee and Democrats has already delivered for Oklahoma, and most importantly for its workers. The state GDP outpaced national growth in the third quarter of 2022, and unemployment hovers at historic low rates. I see the motto of work conquers all and I know you don't take it lightly in Oklahoma. But a desire to work isn't all that's needed, even in a strong economy. Workers must be able to work fairly and be compensated fairly. Further, supercharging our economy will only come when we take action on affordable child care and universal paid leave realities, which will eventually happen. This is why federal direct investments in workers and their families have been so crucial to these communities. Democrats expanded the child tax credit, which brought nearly 60,000 Oklahoma children out of poverty, cutting the poverty rate in half. No policy has done more to reduce child poverty than this one. The American Rescue Plan permanently increased desperately needed federal care in terms of child investments across Oklahoma and other 49 states. The critical step was first in expanding that child credit and enabling workers to re-enter the workforce. I will say again that we will continue to defend Social Security and Medicare and not to have any cuts based upon some of the proposals that we've heard about. We also put money back in the pockets of working Americans with the Inflation Reduction Act. We helped lower health care costs by allowing Medicare to negotiate high-cost drugs, capping out-of-pocket costs for 21,000 Oklahoma seniors and reducing health insurance premiums for millions of Americans. All of these life-saving policies will provide more certainty for American families. We've already seen this law drive industry action. Just this week, a major insulin manufacturer announced a universal cap on insulin costs. And our work in spurring growth for small businesses and workers in families across the state of Oklahoma in places just like Yukon will continue, you can be assured. This is one of the top states for clean energy development, thanks to Oklahoma's ample wind, solar, and hydro energy potential, existing infrastructure, and talented labor force. When coupled with the bipartisan infrastructure law and tax credits championed by the Ways and Means Democrats in the Inflation Reduction Act, the clean energy economy in Oklahoma is accelerating. I must tell you all today that I hope that this state, like others, will take full advantage of $369 billion of tax credits for battery power storage, which this state is particularly well positioned to take advantage of. An estimated 2,000 clean energy jobs have also been created in Oklahoma since last August, and that's just the beginning. Companies across the Heartland are capitalizing on incentives to drive R&D and turbocharge manufacturing right here at home. From electric vehicles to wind power, economic growth will be felt by rural and industrial communities alike. And as you'll hear today, the contrast is clear. We want to make sure that the wealth of America is evenly distributed across this great country of ours. We know that the state of our economy is strongest when government puts the interests of the middle class over the well-connected and the wealthy. We're going to continue to build on that work to expand affordable child care, paid leave, protect Social Security and Medicare, and for those who are openly advocating tearing up those benefits from the people of Oklahoma. We too understand the importance of promoting economic opportunity for family farmers and other business in the agricultural sector. One of the great things that happened in this country was the unity that was caused by great farmers in the farmland of this country and what it did for urban people who needed food. You helped contribute to making that a reality. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Look forward to them sharing their experiences with us.
Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I want to start by thanking our hosts and welcoming my colleagues to the Heartland of America and my home, the great state of Oklahoma. Although my fellow Oklahomans here today are facing many challenges under this administration's economic policies, it is fair to say we're all proud to be Americans. But we thank God we are from Oklahoma. Most don't know this. Everybody thinks of us as a 95% oil and gas state, but almost 50%, over 50% of our energy in our state are from renewables, something that needs to get out across America. We believe in all the above energy for all of America. You know, over the past few years, our state has welcomed families and businesses, both small and large, from states like New York and California. And we're represented today from our members from New York and California. We want them to experience, and maybe you all will want to come here also. Not in your current capacity, but in fact, census data shows that Oklahoma is among the top 10 states in the country where people are moving to. But while Americans can migrate to states with friendlier business climates, they still face an overbearing federal government and burdensome policies from the Biden administration that stunt their growth. I'm excited for my colleagues to hear the stories of hardworking Oklahomans. Unfortunately, many job creators and entrepreneurs face unnecessary struggles because of this administration's harmful regulation and reckless spending. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I appreciate your time away from what you do every day to come here and speak to us. Your testimony today will inform our legislative process, and as a former business owner, spent a lifetime on farms. I literally sold a farm to buy my first McDonald's restaurant. I know firsthand that the American people, not Washington, know what's best for all of us. Thank you, Chairman Smith, for coming to the heart of America and allowing Oklahomans to highlight the devastating effects of the Biden economy. Are you back?
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. I'm pleased to recognize the other gentleman from Oklahoma, the chairman of the Science Committee, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you and Ranking Member Neal and all the other members of the illustrious Ways and Means Committee to the great state of Oklahoma. For those of you who are not familiar with the committee process, I, like many other members, belong to a variety of other committees, but my friends here would note to you there's only one Ways and Means Committee. Correct, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
The topic of this field hearing is not only timely and appropriate, but the location is too. I can't think of a single industry in our state that is not directly impacted by the work of this committee. The future of ag, energy, manufacturing in Oklahoma and across the country is dependent on tax and trade policies that work for these industries, not against them. I look forward to joining my colleagues today in learning more about the challenges these witnesses are facing on the ground and how Congress can help address those issues. With that, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the committee, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would like to introduce our witnesses. Mr. Brian Jackson runs Route 66 Meat Processing and Market, Oklahoma's only USDA-inspected meat processing facility. He's a West Point graduate and served in the Army for 6 years, for which he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and Purple Heart. Mr. Chuck Mills is owner and president of Mills Machine Company Incorporated, a major custom manufacturer of earth drilling tools founded by his family in 1908. The company now exports an average 25% of its products to an estimated 70 international markets. Ms. Kelly Payne is a fifth-generation farmer and rancher from Mustang, Oklahoma, and serves as North Central District Vice President for the Oklahoma Cattle's Association and was recently appointed as chairperson of the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Foundation. Mr. Joseph Bravetti manages all aspects of oil and gas operations, prospect and property evaluation for independent exploration and development for Charter Oak production. And Ms. Shiloh Kantz is the executive director of the Oklahoma Policy Institute, an organization she has worked with since 2010. The committee has received your written statements, and they will all be made part of the formal hearing record, as I also want to let others in attendance know that they too may provide a written statement. Please find the clipboards and forms that our teams will have throughout the hearing where you can fill those out and submit your information into the record. Now for our guest, you each all have 5 minutes to deliver your oral remarks. Mr. Jackson, you may begin when you're ready.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. It's truly an honor for me to be here to share my thoughts with you on the state of the American economy. I've have the honor to serve in combat in Iraq, spent a decade in the oil field, and now own and operate a USDA-inspected meat processing facility in western Oklahoma. We're located about halfway between Amarillo and Oklahoma City, so we serve customers from 2 states. From our faith in God and a little perseverance, we built our facility from the ground up during the COVID pandemic and are one of 12 USDA-inspected plants in the state. We left the city life to live on my wife's 5th-generation family farm. To give you an idea of our size, a large meat packer can process 800 beef in a day. We process that in a year. It takes dozens of plants like ours across each state to meet the demands of the local community. Our first challenge I'd like to discuss is labor. And there's a famous quote by Michael Hopp that sums it up. Hard times create strong people create good times create weak people create hard times. Coming out of the COVID pandemic, we're still facing an increasingly challenging work environment where employees may or may not show up to work for a slew of reasons. As a result, Our ability to complete the work we commit to is made even more difficult. Today, we find ourselves counseling and coaxing workers into just showing up to work and doing a satisfactory job. I believe a deterioration of our family structure and work ethic contributes to the rising mental health issues we are seeing. Trauma, like what I saw in combat, requires tools to learn to cope with, and today that's being substituted in our culture by drugs, alcohol, and other harmful vices. I see firsthand that we're at a point of weak people creating hard times due to a widespread entitled attitude. People in our community are suffering, and part of the problem is they aren't empowered to change it. Hopelessness and depression are rampant. Now, there are still hardworking people out there, most living paycheck to paycheck, just not as many as there used to be. We are grateful for the team we have in that we take their welfare very personal. In our small farming community, we don't have an endless supply of workers. We're a town of 4,800 people, most of whom have to travel for work. We work what is considered a dirty job, but still an essential job. For our team of people, it provides them a work-life balance, but it does require grit. I've been humbled several times by corporate layoffs and then later by the experience of starting a small business. To be as resilient as generations before us, we need to toughen up. Failure is part of the journey. Being allowed to fail instead of having your way paved for you is empowering. The American dream is not lived on easy street. It takes grit and the discipline to put the work in day after day to realize the American dream. Employers must adapt to the current work environment or risk having to close their shop. For 2022, we sent out almost 4 times more W-2s than the number of employees we currently have on staff. Finding ways to be more flexible with employee work schedules is key. From my time in the Army, I learned that in order to have the best team, you have to have high standards, but also take care of them. It's about respecting other people and their property. And the fact is, people do not care what you know until they know that you care. The second area to cover is inflation. We see firsthand how out of control costs have gotten in the last several years. Equipment costs have doubled. If you were to construct our building today, it would cost at least twice as much. And for supplies, we face both rising freight costs and parts on back order being commonplace. Every week, we see the purchasing power of our dollar continue to decline. When it comes to cash flow, we're experiencing delayed payment from customers, sometimes up to 60 days. And for a small business that operates on cash, it restricts our ability to meet our obligations on time. Interest rates are high, even if you have excellent credit. The beef industry as a whole is in a tough spot. There's not much profitability for a rancher because the cost of fertilizer and feed is too high. We've seen smaller and smaller, less fed out cattle come through our facility than when we first opened 18 months ago. My brother-in-law is a 5th-generation rancher who supplies all of our beef that we retail and wholesale. And we provide farm-to-table beef, locally raised, locally processed, and we see the impact of higher costs. I'm proud to be an American and would like to emphasize the importance of creating value in American-made products. This will continue to create more pride in the work that we do so that more hardworking people come to work for the American dream. At some point, it seems like we've lost our way. We need to have pride in the products that come from our country. And in conclusion, as a nation, we face many challenges, but there's nothing that we cannot overcome by working together. Just as my grandparents did following the Great Depression, the hard times we are in now will create a stronger nation for our kids. I'm encouraged by your willingness to listen and affect change. Thank you for your consideration of my testimony and for your service to our great nation.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Mills, you're now recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor to testify before you today. My name is Chuck Mills. I'm president of Mills Machine Company, custom manufacturer of shallow infrastructure earth drilling tools and bits located in Shawnee. We were established in 1908 and still operate under the same family ownership. I personally have been managing the business for 44 years and have guided it through multiple booms, busts, and recessions. The last 3 years have been the most difficult. Before the pandemic, we faced some workforce issues. Our company, like so many others, struggled to find skilled workers. Initially, I believed that education was one of the issues and felt that one solution would be engaging private sector business people into the classroom to promote applied learning practices that would be beneficial to the students. I promoted that while I was the chairman of the state chamber to try to get other businesses engaged to do the same. As you can tell, I like to be involved in finding solutions for common business problems, which is why I've been involved in workforce development for 22 years, serving on local and state workforce boards. So I have a good idea of what the problems are. Locally, I served as the mayor of Shawnee from 2004 to 2008. Though we struggled before to find workers before COVID, the pandemic made this struggle so much harder on my company and employers across Oklahoma. It was hard for me and other business owners to understand how the federal government could incentivize Americans to stay home. A perfect example of our problem with our supply chain is if my supplier is unable to find employees, he is unable to provide me the raw materials needed for my business, which negatively impacts our ability to satisfy our customers' needs. This caused delays throughout the supply chain. The lack of workforce, in my opinion, is the root cause of all of our problems today. To help alleviate the supply chain concerns for my company, I had to hire a full-time employee just to source materials. This staff member spends all day sourcing best materials and availability. We are constantly looking for new vendors so that we can remain competitive for our customers. We have successfully sourced about 40 to 50 new vendors in the last year. When we do find materials, we must outlay more cash up front to buy as much product as we can in order to lock in the price. The lack of workforce and supply chain issues combined with inflationary pressures have made this economy the most difficult economy I have dealt with in over 4 decades. Prior to the pandemic, we had a predictable price increase from 3 to 3.5% a year. In 2021, starting really in January, we were hammered with compounding price increases for our raw materials. Really starting in January of 21, we first had our increase of 25%. Following month, we had another 15, the following 20, and it went from 10 to 25% for the next 8 months, compounding monthly. After 8 months, my vendors finally said, I can't send you a price list anymore. You'll have to call in order to get the price, which makes it very difficult to price your products to your customers. The practice continued through all of 22, and now in 23, the prices have stabilized somewhat, but have increased on others. Due to these price increases, we are forced to reprice our materials every 90 days. We offer thousands of products, so this is a significant undertaking. We also have been forced to import materials in order to be competitive. I have explored options for onshoring and nearshoring in response to the tariffs on Chinese metal products, and it hasn't been competitive. The tariffs simply add 25% to the cost of our raw materials, making it harder to be competitive in the world economy. Overall, our sales are similar to pre-COVID levels, but it's not because we're selling more product. We're actually selling less at higher prices. I'm having to spend more and more time on day-to-day operations like workforce issues and adjusting prices, which has resulted in less time for marketing, new product development, and business expansion, which will be better for our business, the local economy, and the country. I love what I do. I love making things and offering solutions for our customers. All I ask is for Congress to please allow me to continue running my family-owned business so that I may be able to pass it to the next generation. Please encourage all able-bodied Americans to return to the workforce and do not raise taxes that would further restrict our cash flow. I'll close by asking to not make it any harder for me to stay in business here in Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Ms. Payne, you're now recognized.
Chairman Smith and members of the Ways and Means Committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Kelly Payne. I'm a fifth-generation farmer and rancher from Mustang, Oklahoma, and I have had the opportunity to serve on the district staff for former Congressman Wes Watkins. Been a small business owner, worked for a number of cattle livestock auctions and cattle buying companies, and even ran for Oklahoma City Council. I've also held a variety of economic development positions with an emphasis on agriculture, including previously serving as the first ever female president of the Oklahoma National Stockyards. I'm currently serving as North Central District Vice President for the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association. and was recently appointed as chair of the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Foundation. I'm also a proud Oklahoma Farm Bureau member. While my primary agriculture operation is cattle ranching, I also have a family agritourism venture with my sister. We'd like to begin by sharing some very staggering numbers relative to the drought. The USDA January 1 inventory of all cattle and calves in Oklahoma was down 11.5% from 2022. That is a decrease in 600,000 head in 1 year. It is double that of Nebraska, the state with the second largest decrease in cattle. It is important to remember that this number reflects all cattle, including the cow herd, replacement heifers, stockers, and feedlot cattle. The decrease in the number of cows in Oklahoma alone was 140,000 head, again the largest decrease of any state in the nation. While these numbers alone are staggering, when one begins to think of the negative implications, the situation absolutely becomes overwhelming. Oklahoma is a beef cow state. Much of our rural economy is dependent upon the cow. Every year, ranchers wean and sell their calves, which represents the heart of the economic engine in rural Oklahoma. With fewer calves to sell, that means fewer dollars generated. But worse, not only are there fewer calves, there are also fewer cattlemen and women. The struggles of drought are exacerbated by high input costs, including fuel, feed, and other supplies. All these negative impacts have caused some ranchers to sell their entire herd, and many have indicated that they won't restock anytime soon, if at all. Fewer cows also means that fewer bulls are needed. Seed stock operations like our host today, Express Ranch, depend upon a robust bull market driven by cow-calf producers with plenty of cows. Currently, the cattle market is strong. For the last week of February, 600-pound calves selling at the Oklahoma National Stockyards were bringing 2 to 215 per hundredweight. This makes sense, though, given a drastic reduction in the cattle supply. But high prices of something that I don't have many of, or any of, doesn't help me economically. Remember, we have 140,000 less cows. That means 140,000 less calves to sell. Federal government involvement in livestock production does have a positive side. The Farm Bill of 2018 signaled a major turning point for animal agriculture in the U.S. That important piece of legislation enshrined permanently many of the programs that have directly benefited livestock producers, specifically in times of hardship. Examples include the Livestock Indemnity Program, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, Emergency Relief Program, and the Livestock Forage Disaster Program, just to name a few. The total disaster payments for program year 2022 in these categories alone in Oklahoma are $4.6 million and rising. Let me be very clear. These programs are vital and important to livestock producers, and they must be continued in the 2023 Farm Bill. The negative side of the story deals with the overreaching regulatory agenda that proposes new and debilitating burdens that will undercut our livestock business. Examples include the EPA's New Waters of the U.S., or WOTUS rule, issued just a couple of months ago. While EPA did recognize ponds and watering holes, the new rule goes backward to regulate ditches and draws that seldom see water, and certainly not in times of drought. The new WOTUS rule ignores the great work that animal agriculture has done to preserve and promote a positive impact on our environment. Modern poultry, swine, and cattle operations have adopted so many new and emerging technologies that have provided substantial benefits in decreasing water usage and positively managing manure as fertilizer. Here in Oklahoma, the Endangered Species Act has been employed by the administration's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the detriment of cattle grazers in western Oklahoma. Recently, the service issued a threatened and endangered listing for the lesser prairie chicken, requiring ranchers to seek an approved grazing plan for their own ranches. Once again, the great work ranchers have done to improve and maintain wildlife habitat was ignored, and the service provided no direction about who can approve a proposed grazing plan. Many producers, including myself, began diversifying our operations about a decade ago when we went through our last drought. By certifying a portion of our own farm in agritourism, investing in greenhouses, and partnering with other fruit and vegetable growers, we were able to have an additional revenue stream. We also began hosting 2 festivals to educate our urban friends on where their food comes from. While this has been incredibly rewarding to us, regretfully, we have had to cancel the last 2 events due to drought and the current economic state, further reducing our family income as well as cutting off the source of fresh food to our customers. We have enough challenges with Mother Nature. Let's not compound the problem with more regulations. I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you again for allowing me to share my perspective on the state of the American economy in the Heartland.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Mr. Bravetti, you're recognized.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Congressman Hearn, thank you for your leadership. It is an honor to testify before you today on behalf of Charter Oak Production and the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma. I'm Joe Bravetti, the managing member of Charter Oak Production, and we're a small private oil and gas company here in Oklahoma City with 9 employees. Since founding the company in 2004, our primary focus has been in the oil-rich areas of central to southern Oklahoma. I began my career in the industry as an engineer, working in the field in South Texas. I'm a board member of the Petroleum Alliance of Oklahoma, which represents 1,400 individual and member companies. I'm also honored to have been appointed a board member of the producer-funded Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, which restores historic well sites and provides classroom resources for educators from elementary through the college level. Charter Oak is one of 4,000 oil and natural gas companies working in Oklahoma. To put in perspective, together we make up more than half of the state's private sector GDP growth. We're the state's largest taxpayer, accounting for about 1/3 or $65 billion of Oklahoma's GDP and generating $2.5 billion in tax payments to the state. The oil and gas industry provides employment for 200,000 Oklahomans, 75,000 in direct jobs, and another 125,000 in supporting sectors. Each year, Oklahoma oil and gas producers pay more than $2 billion in royalties to mineral owners. These mineral owners are everyday people who use this money to buy groceries, they support their family farms and ranches, and just help pay their daily living expenses. In the past year, Charter Oak and its dedicated team of service companies who employ hundreds of people in the field drilled and completed 10 wells to help meet the energy needs of American families. During that same year, we have seen the cost of our wells increase from less than $8 million each to over $10 million each, 30% increase, and that's considerably more than what we are told the inflation rate is by the current administration. Companies like Charter Oak have made the U.S. not just a world leader today in oil and natural gas production, but we are also the world leader in greenhouse gas reductions thanks to natural gas-powered electric generation. There's no other country in this world that produces hydrocarbons in a manner as clean and as safe as we do here. Importing foreign oil production or encouraging the same is contrary to American principles, and it threatens our energy security as a nation. My written testimony provides color on many regulatory hurdles that we are dealing with today and the challenges we're expecting later this year. The EPA's proposed one-size-fits-all rules for methane and waste prevention is a killer for small family-owned companies whose marginally economic wells are very important to America's energy portfolio. The administration's permitting reforms for operations in federal lands are unnecessarily complex, costly, and delay oil and gas projects far beyond what is reasonable. A current example is last week we were informed that it would take the BLM cadastral office in Santa Fe between 2 to 3 years to review our river survey just so we could get to the point to nominate acreage into a federal lease sale. By the way, we've already drilled this well. It's been delayed so long. We've altered the tract of this well so we didn't have to traverse federal minerals, but they're still within our unit. On the tax front, I asked the committee to protect the ability of oil and gas companies of every size to deduct their ordinary and necessary business expenses. These intangible drilling costs, which are expenses like fuel, labor, and trucking, frequently make up 85% of the cost of the new well. The recent book minimum tax unfairly penalizes some of the larger independents from deducting such expenses. For a smaller independents, the punitive nature of the alternative minimum tax in the current tax code limits our deductibility of the IDC. We drill out of our cash flow, and the AMT severely restricts our ability to invest in new drilling. So let me conclude. We don't want special treatment. We just want a level playing field to encourage investment. Burdensome regulations, increased taxes on oil and natural gas hamper production and the ability of companies like ours to work. Unchecked inflation has hit all Americans very hard, including the independent oil and gas producer. Please address this by slowing federal spending growth, balancing the federal budget, as all of us do, with our personal and business budgets. And let's stop going down the same anti-hydrocarbon road that's wreaking havoc in Europe. That's our wake-up call, America. We don't want an America like that. We don't need more energy. America needs more energy, not less. More energy for America equates to more prosperity for all Americans, and America-produced energy is translated to improved American national security. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bravetti. Ms. Kantz, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm very honored and thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony on the topic, in what ways can the federal government make the economy work for Oklahomans. My name is Shiloh Kantz, and I'm the Executive Director of Oklahoma Policy Institute, or OK Policy as we're informally known. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy think tank. While COVID-19 laid bare economic vulnerability in Oklahoma, these problems were not new. Oklahoma's poverty rate is consistently among the highest. Even pre-pandemic, 1 in 7 Oklahomans, including 1 in 5 children, lived in poverty. In 2018, 1 in 4 Oklahoma jobs were in occupations with a median wage below the poverty line for a family of 4. Our poverty rates have barely budged over the last decade. Federal actions during the pandemic made a real difference. It's a shame those interventions were not made permanent. 460,000 Oklahoma households, including 816 children living in those households, received the expanded child tax credit. The credit lifted an additional 59,000 Oklahoma children out of poverty. That money was spent wisely on food, utilities, clothing, rent, and transportation, likely minimizing the trauma to our children. Now, 276,000 Oklahoma children are losing out on that full credit. The Child Independent Care Tax Credit expansion helped our working families secure child care to continue their employment. Qualifying Oklahoma families got back up to half of what they spent on child care that year. For some households, that's a game changer. Expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit meant there was a brief moment when Oklahoma's childless workers received targeted relief. The expansion tripled the EITC for childless adults and waived the usual age limits, and reached an estimated 229,000 childless workers in Oklahoma. It too lapsed at year end. So where do low-income Oklahomans need support? At work. I think the testimony we've heard here definitely addresses that as well. Some Oklahoma workers are covered by the Family Medical Leave Act, the federal family FMLA protections, but they can't afford to take unpaid leave. Only 1 in 20 of the bottom 10% of earners have paid leave. Just 1 in 5 workers have access to paid leave, and those are mostly high-income earners. The impact these numbers have on Oklahoma's families are real. I can't take off if my kid's sick if I don't have unpaid leave. More than half of Oklahomans, including 68% of rural Oklahomans, are in a child care desert. Either no providers within their zip code or there are too few slots. This number just really hits me hard because I've got 3 kids at home too. In recent years, the number of child care facilities has fallen by 2/3 from 6,000 to 2,300. Housing was an issue before the pandemic. Oklahoma's 2 largest metros were the nation's top 20 for eviction rates per capita. Emergency rental assistance during the pandemic helped, but it also lapsed. Today, more than 2 in 5 Oklahomans working full-time can't afford a 2-bedroom rental. An Oklahoma worker needs to earn $16.61 per hour to afford that 2-bedroom rental. But 17 of the most common 30 professions in Oklahoma, including teachers' assistants, home health aides, and customer service representatives, pay less than that. So what has helped our workforce? 2 major programs brought targeted relief, including unemployment insurance and Medicaid expansion. When the pandemic hit, Oklahoma saw more unemployment claims in March 2020 than it did in 2009 at the Great Recession's peak. While some fraudulent unemployment claims were made, including some to us, Those claims were investigated and determined ineligible for payment. The state's unemployment insurance did what it was created to do in that unprecedented time, assist Oklahomans in their time of need. And in the summer of 2020, Oklahomans passed Medicaid expansion through a ballot initiative. It's been an unequivocal success. In January, 358,155 working age adults were enrolled in Medicaid expansion. Because of Medicaid expansion, Oklahomans exiting incarceration will get insurance before returning to their communities. Tribal health systems are more solvent, and record levels of children are insured. I know if we prioritize our communal why, improving the lives of all Oklahomans, we can find compromise across political divides. Thank you for the time to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kantz, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for your excellent testimony, and for once again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for being here. We'll now proceed to the question and answer session, and I'll begin first. I know that my colleagues are eager for the opportunity to ask a number of more specific questions as we hear from you all about how the policies coming out of Washington have impacted your lives here in the Heartland. So I'll keep my questions to just one, but I will ask each of you all to respond to it. Under President Trump, one of the key changes this committee made for working American families was to double the amount folks can deduct from their income each year and to lower their federal tax bill. Those who are benefiting the most from that change are median income households, which is about $60,000 per year right here in Oklahoma. As life has become more expensive for all Americans over the last 2 years, we are seeing why deducting more from income makes sense. Because more and more family budgets is having to be used for so many basic needs just to get by. And when President Biden releases his budget on Thursday, we'll again see that he wants this relief from federal taxes for American families to expire. I want you each to answer this question through the perspective of your customers, your suppliers, your neighbors and friends. In the midst of a 40-year high spike in the cost of living, what would it mean for them if this committee further reduced their yearly tax burden to give American families an extra couple $100s in their pocket each year right now? Mr. Jackson, why don't we start with you and go down the line?
Chairman Smith, I can tell you that reducing the taxes for a small business would greatly help us. Was that your question as far as, could you repeat that, please?
So in the taxes that were cut in 2017, it was doubling of the standard deduction for folks who don't itemize. And so this affected over 80% of Americans. So most of your customers would probably be in the standard deduction. That will expire. In fact, in the president's budget on Thursday, he'll outline for it to expire. Do you think that it would help your customers, your suppliers, if we would actually increase the deduction so that they would save more on their taxes?
I think further reducing taxes would definitely be a great thing. And as a small business owner, I can tell you that any money saved is reinvested in our business, and how early on we are. It is a struggle to make sure, like I mentioned in my testimony, to have the cash flow to make sure that we can meet payroll, and then beyond that, offer benefits for people who have been with us for an extended period of time, paid time off, and health care, things like that. So the more we can receive in terms of help and making our life easier and paying less taxes, the more we can do for our employees.
From a business perspective, a small business perspective, what is the tax advantage that has helped benefit your small company the most?
I would say the number one thing was the payroll tax credit early on. That helped fund us as we cycled through so many employees early on. We've retained about 25% of those folks that started with us in the beginning. And so that was the greatest benefit for us to help us meet our obligations early on as we had to operate with cash as an early business.
Perfect. Mr. Mills?
I would concur with really pretty much everything he said. You know, I think more about my employees than myself because they're really the ones that do the work. I just kind of guide them. So, you know, they're definitely impacted every day by the taxes they have to pay. We're burdened, of course, with having to continually pay more and more and more just to keep our employees. And as a small company, we compete against most of the big companies, and especially in the oil field. I mean, I make drilling tools and bits, but it's not for oil. It's just shallow drilling, like water and things. And so, but we have to compete. We have to pay those same benefits, health care, you know. So there's a huge burden on myself as a small business. But I think it would be a mistake to take away those tax, breaks for especially just the average worker. With inflation today, it's accelerated so much that it's a huge benefit. So, and I agree with I have to tell you, I've never taken any federal funds ever. None of our generations have. We've always just been on our own. We've made no bailouts, or we're just not in that industry. And that payroll protection program was a huge shot in the arm at the right time. And it allowed us to retain all of our employees and continue to prosper and grow with a good base. So that is one of the few really bailouts that we've had the opportunity to work with. And I thank Congress for that at the perfect time. So it did work. But I would think this would be a very bad time to take away any more tax breaks for especially the average worker.
Thanks, Mr. Mills. Ms. Payne?
I think you'll see the panel mirror the responses all the way down the line here. I guess from my perspective, though, anytime that hardworking Americans can keep more money in their pocket, we should give them that opportunity, especially in these uncertain times that we're in. A lot of my neighbors are not only farmers and ranchers, but they have an off-farm job because they have to. But as things get tighter from in the ag sector and all of us, the more money, what Grandpa always said, if you want to double your money, fold it in half and put it in your pocket. I think those days are over. So, but that would be where I'm coming from with it.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Mr. Bravetti?
Well, Chairman Smith, I'm having a hard time thinking of any country that taxed their way to prosperity. So lower taxes are certainly better for all. That rising tide would lift all boats. Specifically to your comment about the removal of the standard deduction, I think of all of the workers in the field, the dozens and dozens of people who work on our wells, whether they're driving saltwater trucks, whether they're building a fence or working on a drilling rig or a frac crew, they're not itemizing deductions. They depend upon that standard deduction. I think that's very critical for working class Americans, and I would certainly hate to see that lapse.
Thank you, Mr. Bravetti. Ms. Cant?
Thank you, Chairman. I do believe that targeted relief is the way to go. I think we firmly believe, we hear a lot of working Americans, working Oklahomans. We truly feel that sweeping, and I truly feel that sweeping, maybe the tax code isn't the place unless it's targeted tax credits, like we spoke about the child tax credit and child dependent care tax credit. The income tax, I think, from my history, has less impact immediately on the people who need it the most.
Thank you. Mr. Neal, you're now recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for your superb testimony. I was reminded as a supporter, even though I come from a highly urbanized state, that I've been a consistent supporter of the Farm Bill. And part of the reason for that is it's what the farmlands of the country produce for urban America. But it's also a reminder of how Congress once cooperated on many of those issues. Two champions of that substantial initiative were Bob Dole and George McGovern, who both had shared a common World War II experience with heroism, the two of them. And I think that these conversations that we have about these sorts of initiatives could be a lot less hostile than they become. and trying to find these common purpose and common ground is really important. So let me go to Ms. Kantz for a moment. The Affordable Care Act has really been a success. 20 million more Americans have health insurance, and insurance is based on risk and the sharing of risk. One of the issues that has always troubled many of us has been those states that did not expand Medicaid, and I want to congratulate Oklahoma for expanding Medicaid to make sure that those at the lower end of the economic spectrum have an opportunity to receive health care at an earlier stage of life. It's a good investment in good health care. So the results that you've had, Ms. Kantz, here at Oklahoma have really been positive. Could you briefly talk about how important this step was in benefiting families across Oklahoma?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. We estimated in July 2022 that Oklahoma's uninsured rate had dropped below 10% due to the combination of Medicaid expansion and the public health emergencies continuous coverage requirement. In addition to reaching Oklahomans who were in what we called the coverage crater, formerly unable to access either Medicaid or subsidized marketplace coverage, expansion has reached kids who were formerly eligible but whose parents likely didn't know it. In 2022, Oklahoma's child uninsured rate reached its lowest rate ever. Because of Medicaid expansion, Oklahomans can expect stronger hospitals moving forward, as hospitals in states that have expanded Medicaid are 84% less likely to close than hospitals in non-expansion states. Based on other states' experiences, Oklahoma's hospitals can expect to see less uncompensated care, increased Medicaid revenue, and better financial margins. Roger Kanak is the CEO of Fairview Regional Hospital and a member of my board. Medicaid expansion has allowed his hospital to expand, and a few years ago, his hospital nearly went out of business because it couldn't afford to keep the lights on. We anticipate that Medicaid expansion will have helped our workers keep working. It's hard to tease that information out right now given noise of the pandemic and the data, but other expansion states have found that expansion helped people without a job get one and help people with a job stay in that job. We're no longer tying health care to an employer. We're all better able to show up at work and at home when we can see a doctor and fill a prescription. In terms of our state budget, we have every expectation that expansion will at least break even or save Oklahoma money, because that's the experience every other expansion state has had. Medicaid on the chopping block means people's lives on the chopping block. It's whether a parent can see a doctor and fill a prescription. It's whether the kids with disabilities can see a specialist. My own daughter sees a specialist. We have to drive an hour and a half to see that specialist because there's no other specialist in Oklahoma providing care that she needs. So for us, before Oklahoma was known for having the most successful Medicaid expansion coming out of state question, before we were known for leading the country in criminal justice reform, we were the state with the chronic budget shortfalls. We had 9 revenue failures between 2000 and 2020. So we need Medicaid. We want Medicaid in Oklahoma, and our families need Medicaid. We shouldn't have to decide between going to the doctor and paying rent.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick comment as my time is running low. Not knowing a lot about health care in Oklahoma, I can say this with some accuracy, that those hospitals are heavily dependent upon Medicare and Medicaid. Private insurance pays a very small amount now in our healthcare system. And the truth is that I think you could say a rule of thumb, it's close to 65% of the money that is allocated from Medicare and Medicaid. And the other point that I want to make about Medicaid is I assume we're going to be discussing it in the next few weeks as we see the Republican budget as well. That a reminder, almost 70 cents on the dollar now goes to nursing home care from Medicaid. It's become a middle class entitlement, which was not its original intention. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For far too long, unelected bureaucrats and D.C. politicians have attacked the family-run farms, energy producers, and manufacturing companies across the Heartland, what some in Washington would consider to be the flyover country. These same politicians have never set a foot in a place like Oklahoma, so again, I appreciate everybody being here, but to see what's happened with you all invested your lives in what you're doing, your stories, 4th, 5th generation for your time in Iraq and defending the freedoms of this country. It's great for everybody to hear in D.C. of what America looks like. As many of us represent 800,000 in our districts across America, it's great to see everybody what they're doing. Many Oklahomans ask me, having spent 35 years in business, when I first started running, what surprised me the most about being in Washington, D.C. And my response was then is the same as it is now. It's how many people talk about things they know absolutely nothing about. And what you all do and our witnesses do when they come to these hearings is to tell us what's really going on with the policies that are being produced by the federal government. You know, as we see what's happening in the last 2 years, as we've seen a border crisis, we see it on TV every single day. Regardless if anybody wants to admit it or not, it's a crisis. Economic crisis, you all feel the experience of inflation. A labor shortage crisis, you all have explained that. A supply chain crisis, we talk about what we want to do with China, but policies coming out of the administration right now are completely contradictory to that. Energy crisis, you all experiencing this every single day. So despite the last 2 years of what we've seen in this economy, this administration has chosen to stand by their tax and spend agenda that leaves everyday American taxpayers with less money in their pockets. When the federal government spends more, here's a fact: the American taxpayer has less. Before Joe Biden took office, Oklahoma's economy was thriving. We saw significant sectors of our economy, from agricultural to manufacturing to energy, create new job opportunities. Now restrictive trade policies, as was mentioned, and unnecessary tax increases are limiting the ability for farmers, energy producers, and manufacturers to compete in the global marketplace. I had a question here, but I really just want to say something. As you all listen to what we say and what I've experienced now being in Congress for 4 years, really at the heart of the whole conversation is with us in Washington, D.C. versus everyday Americans that we are out in the Heartland, is really trying to ascertain who does it better. You as the individuals creating the jobs, the workers trying to take care of themselves and their family, or Washington, D.C. that wants all of your taxpayer dollars, and for us to decide who should get what in a targeted environment. And that's the decision process at the highest level that's going on right now. Who can do it better, Washington, D.C. or everyday Americans? So my question is something very simple. Which is better? Leaving the taxpayer dollars, we have a baseline we have to meet. National defense, secure our nation, as our founders described, leaving as much money in certainly the lower middle class income pockets so that they can do the basic needs like supply child care and health care and go find the right job and not depend on the federal government. Our success should be measured by how many people we get out of poverty, not how many people are on Medicaid expansion or other programs in the federal government. And as a person who grew up on food stamps, and whether people want to hear this or not that may be sitting at this table, I've experienced it. I've experienced the way out. And my success story was not that I'm still on welfare, is that I got off of welfare. And I experienced the American dream. And that's what we're here all about today, is to try to ascertain. I do believe in the heart of heart of everybody here, it's about my members that are here, my friends that are here, is that we all have the same goal in mind, is everybody become successful of the American dream. It's the pathway of getting there that we can't agree on. So with that, I would love to start. Ms. Payne, you actually alluded to this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Representative very well said. I was about moved to tears over here, and this farm girl doesn't cry very often. But in thinking back, whenever I was running the Oklahoma National Stockyards and the employees that we had there, it was a very diverse group. And some of the challenge, some of it is because it's very, well, as Brian mentioned earlier, it's a dirty job, so not everybody wants to do it. But the diversity within our staff was everything from, obviously, the redheaded female. We had Army veterans that worked on staff, and we also utilized a lot of justice involved. And seeing, especially with the justice involved, being able to offer them an opportunity to break their cycle, to have a job that meant something at the end of the day, and to be treated fairly was one of the most rewarding things I've ever seen in my life. And that is part of this American dream. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter if you're farmer, rancher, steel, oil and gas, or if you've run into trouble in your past. It doesn't define who you are, but America gives that opportunity, and that is incredible. Within that, you make difficult choices of what on taxing us, but we need to be thinking about as we move forward how everybody deserves a chance to make it. So thank you all.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for having this hearing, and thank you all for being here, the witnesses, and for our very gracious host. I just want to make a couple of comments on the opening statements that were made by our witnesses. The issue of skilled labor and the shortage of skilled labor was brought up, and I just want to say, you're not alone. I hear about that every day in my district. A big contributors are the age of the workforce. People are retiring, and a big contributor to that is the lack of child care, which is a huge problem. So there's a tremendous competition for available workers, and the pay kind of dictates where folks are going, and I think that's an important thing to remember. And I'm sorry about your herd size. I'm a farmer myself, and I've in California up until just recently we've been experienced tremendous drought. So I get it, and I have colleagues who have had to sell their herds because they can't afford the food. There's no water, and there's not a lot. As Mr. Lucas mentioned, this is the premier committee in Congress, but there's little we can do about the drought. In Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has really hurt us as well. We're hurting for fertilizer. In my district, one of the crops grown are sunflower seeds, and we sell 50% of the seeds to Ukraine for their seeds, and that market has just gone away. The good news is the one thing that Congress was able to do, and I know Oklahoma was a big recipient of this, you received a lot of help in regard to disaster relief, and I think that is important. And with the Farm Bill reauthorization coming along, you ought to be really plugged into that lane. It's important. And tariffs, you're right, tariffs are terrible. They should be the last resort. We're experiencing problems from those last administration's imposition of tariffs, everything from raw materials to nails, and it's been crippling. And Mr. Jackson, thank you for your service, and thanks for being in the best branch of the military. And thank you for raising the issue of mental health. It is a huge issue. And I think it's important to note that the Democrats on this committee supported strongly the increase in veterans' benefits that are entitled, veterans are entitled to it. It's helped them a lot. But we still have a long way to go, and I'm a believer that we need to make a major investment in brain research so we can get ahead of the mental health problems rather than applying expensive Band-Aids along the way. Ms. Katz, I'd like to start with a couple questions for you. You mentioned in your testimony that 1 in 5 Oklahoma kids in 2019 were living in poverty. When the Democrats on this committee expanded the child tax credit, the child poverty rate in Oklahoma fell from 13.1% to 6.9%. Can you tell me what Oklahomans used their child tax credit for? What types of things did they buy?
I absolutely can. Thank you, Representative. Data shows that more than 90% of the families with lower incomes use their monthly payments in 5 major categories: putting food on the table, paying utility bills, covering rent or mortgage payments, buying clothing, and covering education costs, which during the pandemic was a new piece for a lot of families to overcome. And they also bought school books, paid credit cards. Very few, under 20%, put it into savings, and then several put it into childcare. That money went into Oklahomans' pockets and helped ease the burden of their monthly bills.
That money spent out across the economy in every city, town, and county in Oklahoma. Thank you very much. There was a lot of talk about the tax policies that the Republicans passed that and what we should do about that. I think it's important to note that the centerpiece of that tax bill was the cut in corporate tax rates that went from 35 to 21%, a much bigger cut than the proponents even wanted. And so, Ms. Katz, I was interested to know families in Oklahoma, what's more compelling, the child tax credit or extending the corporate tax cuts?
Well, I think from the testimony that we've heard here that anything we can do to help our workforce is where we need to be investing. And that will fuel up through the corporate sector. So any investment into our families, into our homes, into our children to help with the trauma, to help with getting out of poverty. I agree, Representative Hearn's statement that our measure of success should be how many people we are getting out of poverty. Every Oklahoman deserves the opportunity to thrive, and how are we providing that?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your generosity with the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I'd like to submit for the record the statement by Austin Puckett, the owner of Benjamin Lee Bison, a family-owned and operated bison ranch in Sarah, Oklahoma, describing how soaring fertilizer, energy, repair, and shipping costs, as well as labor shortages, have harmed his operations.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, your constituent, so I think I can call you by first name. Thank you for your participation today in the hearing and all the work you do on behalf of the cattlemen and women of the great state of Oklahoma. I've often said that I view the role of Congress to do things for people, not to people. In your written testimony, you speak about the positive impact of the Farm Bill programs they've had on the cattle industry, and you've touched on WOTUS and a number of other regulations that potentially harm the industry. Could you speak to the importance of collaboration with producers on the ground when it comes to crafting policy? Should we be asking the people who have to live with what we're doing?
Thank you, Congressman. As a longtime Oklahoman, I got to brag on our delegation. I've always felt like we have, we can get a hold of them. We can talk to our elected officials on the federal level. And whenever I ran the stockyards, I had an opportunity to host many of our federally elected officials there. They came to us. They understand boots on the ground. Collaboration is key. It's nice to be able, it's not just talking directly to you all, but to have access to your staff and to understand. And I would encourage every member in here to spend that time. This is an incredible honor for us to have you all here today and to be able to talk to you face to face, but it is just critically important to get this kind of feedback so that you're not picking winners and losers. We're all, in reference to Representative Hearn's statement earlier, this is the American dream. We're all in this deal together. Let's collaborate and talk one-on-one. Let's show you. I'm sure you didn't expect today to come in here and stand next to great big Clydesdales downstairs, but this is what we do. And I'd be happy to put any of you in the tractor with me.
I've got one more question for you, but before I go to that, I want to turn to Brian for just a moment. I think it was about a year and a half ago, maybe almost 2 years ago, you gave me a tour of the facility in Sarah. You were getting ready to fire up. For the benefit of the crowd, you and I both know state inspected meat in Oklahoma and federally inspected meat, same safety, same quality, same everything. Explain to us why the federal stamp matters. Even though it costs more, why does it matter?
That's a great question, Congressman. The benefit of being USDA inspected is there's no restrictions on any quantity where it can go to. It can ship between states, so there's no limitation. It could even be exported if we chose to, and we're licensed for that.
And that matters greatly when you're moving your product, especially in a state where we produce so much beef in particular. Thank you. Kelly, back to you. Oklahomans, Okies as some of us like to call ourselves, are very resilient people, and we've got a long history of responding to tough things, the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, the drought of the 50s, the hideous drought of 10 years ago, that oil bust of the 80s that turned much of the state upside down. What have producers, through all of these challenging times, what have producers done voluntarily to preserve and improve their land in order to better meet the challenges of weather and prolonged drought? We're not just sitting on our hands, right?
That's correct, Congressman. And you reference, the Dust Bowl. We've obviously learned a lot. We learn more every day, but we have technology in place. We just know more now than we ever have. So whether it was the shelter belts that were planted in the 30s all the way up to current. My operation itself is in a river bottom. very sandy soil. We call it blow sand. And if you'd have been standing out there on Sunday, you'd have had 2 pounds of it in your eyes. But we have to protect that. We, on our outfit, can run about 250 mama cows. I have 1 cow with a calf at her side as of this morning, and the 3 bulls were loaded in a trailer. And then I have 7 fat steers to be able to put in a freezer here in about a year. There's nothing there. But we had to pull those cattle off to protect that grass. If I don't have grass, I can't put cattle on it. So we had to make that decision versus, and we can't afford hay. There's all kinds of sad things going on. But to be able to put in place conservation type practices so that we can be sustainable when it finally does start raining, Congressman.
Bottom line, comprehensive farm bills where we make sure we have the ability to produce and consume are critically important. And in this farm bill, we've got to address how to make the federal inspection available to more packers. Fair statement, Brian?
Yes, sir.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to recognize the gentle lady from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for sharing your perspectives with us this morning. Not every issue raised here is under our committee's jurisdiction, but it's important for us to understand the unique challenges facing each state. And there are certainly differences between the communities that I represent in Southern California and the native, rural, and urban communities here in Oklahoma. But there's also a lot of common ground in terms of the challenges that our small businesses are facing, both in Oklahoma and in California. Supply chain challenges have made life difficult for businesses in both our states, and thankfully in the last Congress, Democrats were able to work with some of our Republican colleagues to pass the CHIPS and the Science Act. We've been talking for years about the loss of supply chains and good-paying jobs overseas, and under the leadership of congressional Democrats, we didn't mindlessly hand multinational corporations a massive tax cut that they didn't need and that they didn't ask us for. Instead, we actually delivered real incentives and the largest infrastructure investment in generations to bring those supply chains back to the U.S. I would note that all 5 of my Oklahoma colleagues voted against these critical investments in our nation's infrastructure. And I guarantee working families in both our states share some of the same challenges trying to juggle child care and elder care, medical expenses, and the paid time off to deal with unexpected emergencies. Once again, Democrats acted to take the pressure off of working families. Under the American Rescue Plan, we expanded the child tax credit and the child dependent care tax credit. I heard from countless constituents that the advanced monthly child tax credit payments finally gave them the breathing room that they needed, and we didn't stop there. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats delivered reform to control the cost of prescription drugs, like capping the cost of insulin at $35 a month. And in my state, most workers can count on guaranteed paid leave. Of course, there are still gaps in paid leave, and the expansion of the child tax credit, sadly, was only temporary. But we know that these are policies that make a meaningful difference for working families. These social programs are not designed to avoid work. They just mean that workers don't have to make those impossible choices between putting food on the table and caring for their loved ones. Democrats delivered critical steps to supporting working families, and we can't stop now. Ms. Kantz, could you please explain the economic impact of a lack of affordable child care has on families throughout the state? And I'm particularly interested in that because I am a working mother and I've had those struggles. They're very real.
Yes, thank you, Representative. And I also am a working mother of 3 and was actually pregnant with my 3rd child when I started this position. And if it had not been for my former boss, David Blatt, saying, bring your kid to work with you, I would not still be sitting in this seat. So I can definitely speak to it. I think the most immediate impact is the lack of affordable child care. That the most immediate impact the lack of affordable child care has is the access to the workforce. It's going to keep parents home. The HHS guideline is 7% of your income should be paid towards child care. I think right now it's about 16% for Oklahoman families. That's huge if you've got 2 minimum wage earners working to head up a household. Then you get into a situation where you have to decide between work and safety for your kid. Do I have affordable child care or do I have cheap child care that might not be as safe for my child? It hasn't. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's a statistic that 6 million women left the workforce during the pandemic because they were primary caregivers either to young children, aging parents, disabled children. We are not seeing that number of women re-enter the workforce. And what do you think that that's due to?
I think it's the majority of the people who stay home and are choosing to stay home in the workforce don't have a choice. They can't. They might not have a parent at home who can help. They might not have a boss who says, bring your kid to work. And I really do feel that it negatively impacts women. The majority is women of caregivers. They're even impacted on their future employment opportunities because there's a gap in their resume.
So what steps should Congress be taking to ensure that all working class families in Oklahoma have access to quality and affordable child care?
One of the things I think that was key to the child tax credit was the ability to receive the timing of the payments. They were spread out. They were able to manage their money. They're better able to plan. There was some consistency. It wasn't a one-time windfall to their income.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My time is running short, but I just wanted to make one last comment, which is earlier a colleague mentioned real Americans in the Heartland. And I want to assure people that the people that I represent in my district are no less real Americans. They're no less resilient. They're no less hardworking towards trying to achieve that American dream. And with that, I will yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. We're all great Americans. Hard-working great Americans.
And there's a lot of descendants of Okies in California, too.
Consistent with committee practice, we'll now recognize members on a 2-to-1 ratio. I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly thank you to our witnesses. I think a great perspective, varying perspective shared among our witnesses. But as a representative of Nebraska and a huge agriculture district, great to be here in an ag area of our country where we get to help feed the world. I think that is a task that sometimes we take for granted ourselves with the production here in America, but the fact that the world is relying on us in so many ways, I think it's important that we get it right. We look at the employee shortage, the worker shortage, and how that triggers the supply chain disruptions and crisis, absolute crisis. There's so many things we really need to talk about, and obviously there's diverse perspective here on this at this table. And I hope that we as the American people and representatives, those of us more specifically, can have the discussions that we need to have, where we can discuss the economic needs of a country, where the broad-based tax relief of 2017 was great for our economy, great for wages, great for productivity, so that individual workers could produce more because the world needs more. The growing population around the world needs to eat, certainly, and we need to be prepared for that. I grow concerned that government payments are discussed in a context without talking about inflation. And if you look at 2020, as painful as it was, I think it's important that we look at that data because the spring of 2020, with the onset of COVID, the economy tanked, unemployment spiked, Congress got involved on a bipartisan basis, not in a perfect way. It would be very interesting to litigate all of that. We don't have the time to do that today. But Congress got involved twice, basically in 2020, in a bipartisan fashion. By the end of 2020, the GDP was back to about even from before the thriving economy that we had heading into COVID. So a new administration came into the White House and insisted on increasing and extending government payments. The president was warned that it would trigger inflation. He dismissed that, pushed it anyway. And so, and other comments that have been made across our economy, across our country, based on the type of industry that you're involved in. I think the president thinks less of people who are involved in the oil and gas industry, and perhaps some other industries as well. And I hope that, again, we can have the discussions we need to have, the debates that we need to have. We shouldn't shy away from disagreement either. Our country is founded on disagreement. But when you look at the policies that need the discussion, I hope that we can do that moving forward. Mr. Jackson, my colleague from I believe your congressman, he stole some of my questions relating to inspection, but I know that it's important, especially as it relates to the federal government, what you do. I'd like anyone on the panel here to discuss what you've done most recently to address the worker shortage that is so acute. Maybe Mr. Jackson, if you want to start with that, what you've done most recently to attract more employees.
One of our biggest challenges is just being in a small community, having a small population. It's very hard to find people with those skill sets, so most people that walk in the door, we have to train them from the ground up. And so any way we can incentivize people looking under a rock, wherever we found people to work, the people who want to show up every day, that's what it's taken. So we've hired the whole gambit of different types of people that you could imagine. Some of my best employees have been former felons, and so they've had challenges, as veterans do sometimes, in readjusting to society. But we've had challenges with just keeping those people, but the number one thing we've done is just searching for them, providing the best opportunity that we can, a healthy environment that's positive, and then not focusing on just the retaining, but also on the growth aspect, how to help them in their work-life balance and help them improve their lives for themselves and their families.
Anyone else? Briefly. I apologize. My time has expired, and I know time is short. So
Go ahead, Mr.
I'll defer to the chairman.
Yeah, you were going to say something, Mr. Mills?
Well, to me, workforce, like I said, I've been involved about 22 years, and, we've got two fronts that we've got to work on the hardest. One is preparing our youth for a successful career. That's our future. For now, it's getting people to come back to work. And I know childcare has been an issue for a lot of people, and, they experience workforce issues as well. That's why there's so many, less daycare facilities open, because they can't find workers. So we all are experiencing this. It's a huge issue. And so, what is it going to take to incentivize people to come back to work and not stay at home? Everything changed with COVID. People got used to staying home. They're like, hey, I kind of like this, I got my office here, and I can take care of my kids, and I can, have all this free time, and I can work at night or whatever. And there's a lot of people that don't want to come back just because of that. My business won't allow that to happen. I have to have people in my shop every day to work. And it's harder and harder to find those skilled workers. But, a lot of it's encouraging kids to actually seek a career and preparing them for a career. And we do a lot of great things in workforce. We've got the individualized career and academic plan here in Oklahoma and many other states that's actually helping kids kind of develop a future for deciding what they want to do after graduation. But those are issues that we deal with, and so I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. And I think it's really great that we get out of Washington, D.C. and actually get out into the country. Look, I realize we're all Americans. It doesn't matter where you live or where you work or where you raise your children or anything else. So yes, that's true. That's true. We are all Americans. I get it. But until you come here, you come to a place where things actually have to take place, as opposed to creating a policy that may or may not work, with one exception, that it will cost you a lot of money. I want to hear more from all of you, because the challenges you're facing, I'm in the automobile business. The number one challenge we face now is finding talent. Not finding customers, but finding talent. How do you take care of those people who buy an automobile from you and bring it back because they need a service? Well, you better have a tech, right? And where I live, people make a habit of hitting deer. And only because during the season, when they're rutting, a buck will go across any highway to get to a doe, no matter what's coming. But we can't find people to fix cars anymore. We kind of can't find people to do almost anything anymore. So when I talk to business people and business owners, and I want to tell you, the number one thing that I worry about in my business is debt. Unserviceable debt is especially scary. I do believe that at some point in this current economy, this wave is going to crest and it is going to fall. And when it falls, there's a lot of people that are going to fall with it because of unsustainable debt. Just to give you an example, last year we brought in $5.0 trillion in tax revenue. Incredible, incredible revenue. But we went out and spent $6.5 trillion. So we talked kitchen table economics. That means a family making $50,000 goes out and spends $65,000 and feels pretty good about itself until the bill comes due. Now, I don't know how you all handle what you have coming. I don't know how we're going to handle with the 250 people we pay every 2 weeks when we reach the point where the revenue doesn't match the outgo. Reckless spending in Washington, D.C. At the time, people thought this was great. It was a windfall for a lot. It wasn't. It was just a deepening tax burden. So each of you, because there's 2.5 minutes left, number one challenge you face, other than talent. I don't know where you are on the debt side of this and how much of it worries you. I spend most of my nights waking up trying to figure out what's going to happen next. So, Mr. Jackson, starting with you, and you've done an incredible job. You hired somebody to go out and figure out how to hire other people. Where is the talent and how do we get it?
So I guess the best way to answer that question is just it's taken us just doing whatever it took to try to stay ahead of the lagging accounts receivable that we face as a small business. And so our biggest challenge is the cash flow and being able to meet those obligations. And so having access to operating lines and things like that, it's tough for a small business. But we're experiencing that no matter what small business that you are. And so I would say that cash flow is our number one concern as a small business and how to meet those obligations.
Mr. Mills.
I agree with that. In this economy, cash is king. And my dad taught me that.
Amen.
And it's true. Having good credit and having cash flow. That's how we've survived through all these 115 years in business, is taking care of business like that and providing good customer service and a quality product. But right now, my greatest concern is that cash flow. Again, with the supply chain, in order for me to control the escalating prices that still continue today, is I have to go out and buy more inventory, outlay more cash. That money's just sitting there on the shelf in the yard. And, you've got to pay for that. That gives you less money to go out and develop new product, buy equipment, hire more people. It's a negative impact on us. And so we're just like everyone else. We see this possible recession coming. Myself and my customers, we're all kind of holding back, being a little conservative, not buying quite as much, because when this thing does crash at some point, it's got to crash a little bit. We don't get caught. And we want to stay in business. So that's our greatest concern right now. Cash flow probably will be the same for everyone.
Ms. Payne.
Thank you. Something that I think needs to be considered from the farming and ranching perspective is whenever you are during calving season, say your cows are calving out in the spring, you are planning, you're looking way, way down the line for your next paycheck. In the cattle industry specifically, that calf crop, it's one time. So it's great that those calves may bring 70,000, 100,000. That is your paycheck for the year, and it's way on down the line. So it's a little bit different thought process from my perspective.
Yeah, that's future inventory. Mr. Brevetti.
Well, you mentioned about the lack of skilled workers, and that affects all of us. And it's probably worth pointing out that you can get a loan to go achieve a degree that you may not be able to find a job in. Yet, how do you fund someone to become a welder, a truck driver. We have a part ownership in a service company, and crane operators are very difficult to find, and we're willing to put them through a training class. At the OERB, the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, that I'm on the board, we have programs that we believe address this by starting with elementary education through middle school, high school, college. We try to get out with volunteers in the classrooms to encourage people what we do in our industry so that they'll want to work in it. And then on a college level, we provide scholarships along with other groups here in the state, such as the local Society of Petroleum Engineers chapter and the API. We feel that this way we can bring more people in, but we still do need to do more.
Well, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you, Chairman. Hey, you also Express Clydesdale. This is a great place for us to come today. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful location, and it's really good to get out in Washington and get around real people who really have to produce every single penny that they spend, in addition to the taxes that they pay. So thank you all so much, and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I do want to remind our friends in the audience as well, we have clipboards right here for you to submit anything to the record of information that you think we should know about, issues that we're facing in the state of the current economy, and also solutions that you think we should look at. Love to recognize the gentle lady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and sharing your stories and your perspectives. I represent Alabama, and I could close my eyes and listen to all of you speak and know that the folks that I represent share many of your concerns. This hearing is about the state of American economy, not Democratic economy, not Republican economy. It's the American economy, and you all have reinforced that. It's about making sure that all of us are vested in the success of this great country that we live in, and that irrespective of your wealth, your race, your gender, we all want to achieve the American dream. We may differ on how we get there, but I think all of us want to achieve the American dream. You know, this month marks the third anniversary of the COVID-19 breakout. I think all of us know that it was a global pandemic. It was not a hoax. It was 1 million people died. Folks in my district that were of color, who had chronic diseases, died disproportionately more often than others, but 1 million Americans died. And I think that no committee had a bigger impact on trying to mitigate the downturn in the economy than the Ways and Means Committee. And I am very proud of the fact that we were able, if only for 1 year, to give a fully refundable child tax credit. And Ms. Kantz, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. I can tell you from the perspective that of my constituents, I had lots and lots of fathers, not just mamas, telling me how important it was for that income support, especially during that vital time. And it did lift people out of poverty. In my district alone, it lifted 30% of the children out of poverty for that 1 year, often because it was an increase in the amount that was given. And as you rightly pointed out, it was given on a monthly basis, not a one-time basis. And so can you talk to me a little bit about how that affected your community? And if you could also talk to us about how it affected members of the Cherokee Nation and how income support was vitally important during that time. And it taught us a lesson because we came out of this pandemic stronger. This economy, 12 million jobs were created in the last 2 years. But I mean, we obviously have things to do, but it's about a balanced approach and making sure that employer and employee alike are prospering in this great economy.
Thank you, Representative Sewell. As a member of a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, I definitely applaud all the work that the tribes have done. There's 38 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma, and they have truly been a beacon of how to care for your citizens. They have definitely stepped up and used the resources. And Cherokee Nation alone has a $3 billion economic impact on Oklahoma. So very proud citizen here, but I definitely think that the federal government would do well to honor the sovereignty of those nations and speak with them, have the table equal for the nations to speak to their citizens' needs individually and not as a whole. And as far as the child tax credit, not everybody has a parent who can watch their kid. Not everyone can afford to work fewer hours. Not everyone works 9 to 5 hours. How many child care systems do you know that are set up to support night shifts? Our hospital workers, our doctors, where are they finding their child care? If they don't have a community, we talk about having boots and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. I wasn't born into a family that had boots.
Yeah.
We got hand-me-down boots. And we had a community and a village around us that helped with those boots. What are we doing in Oklahoma? What are we doing in America to ensure that we're sharing boots, right? And we really need to show up for the working class, our middle class. We heard about the wealth gap. It's real. It's real. It's greater than it's ever been in the history of the United States. And we really do need to show up for our working class families.
You know, the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was really poignant, my state did not expand Medicaid. And frankly, we've seen lots of rural hospitals close because we didn't expand Medicaid. And I think that when you're going through a global health crisis, to not have health insurance, to not be able to provide for yourself and your family, just further undergirds what you were saying. Mr. Chairman, I just want to conclude by just making a comment and observation. We on the Ways and Means Committee, because we have tax and trade and healthcare in our jurisdiction, can use our tax code to really help working families and entrepreneurs and small businesses alike. We would do well to remember that we're all interdependent, that what happens to one of us definitely does affect all of us. And so thank you with that. I want to again thank our witnesses for their testimony.
I want to thank the gentlelady. Recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweiker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we have a country we're borrowing, $48,000 every second. And you'll actually hear both sides care. One side believes in subsidization, one side believes in incentives. But we're all in many ways trying to get to the same goal. And forgive me, but in listening, did anyone actually hear the obvious, at least one of the key obvious problems? I have, functionally 4 over here saying you're desperate to find labor. People that will show up and work, and someone that's concerned about poverty. I was just looking up some of the data for your state, but it's true in my state of Arizona. And it's uncomfortable to talk about, but we're going to have to deal with it. Young males are dramatically underperforming showing up in the economy. Something is going on out there where they're entering universities in similar numbers and graduating in many universities at half the rate. Or they're just not showing up at work. What's honestly going on in our society? And for those of you in the oil patch, in the meat processing, let's be honest, you don't need someone with a university degree, you just need someone that shows up. If I have millions and millions of young males who somehow have disappeared in our economy in the last couple of years, what's going on? Mr. Jackson, when your observation, I know you're in a smaller community, I represent an urban suburban district. We have fentanyl out of control. We have other things. What's happening in your communities? Why this disparity of we have jobs, I don't have labor, but I also have data that says I have a substantial number of these young males not showing up. What's going on?
From my perspective, I think a lot of it has to do with people are today thinking more about what they can get instead of what they can give. And I think we as Americans need to be reminded of what built this country was people's desire to be free from tyranny. And so we have to show up to work. We have to roll up our sleeves and put the work in.
Okay,
to
so
make
you
things better.
see a societal issue?
Yes.
Mr. Mills?
I agree, and I think it all started with participation trophies. Everybody.
Hey, sometimes that's the only way I got a trophy.
Yeah, everybody's a winner. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm sorry. There's winners and losers. And it's okay to lose. I've lost. In business, you lose all the time. I don't get every order I quote. Oh, okay, well, we move on to the next one. And, you just don't take it personal. But that's where it started. It's a society change. And it all starts from home. And some of this, like I said, could actually work through the school system for us. If we could get, I think, business engaged in helping these kids, really find their purpose.
Look, we were in West Virginia a couple weeks ago, and we've also been digging into some of the data in my Phoenix area. And we have a genuine problem with a number of young people, substance abuse, other things going on. I don't know if that's permeated through this part of the country. This is a moral imperative. You have a society that needs people, but then people aren't showing up. Ms. Payne, any theories?
Representative, I think more kids ought to be forced to haul hay during the hot summer.
When we walked through the stables back there, I spent my childhood shoveling horse stalls. I can smell that ammonia a mile away, and I'm still doing it. How about in the oil patch? What do you see?
We see a lot of the same thing. It is difficult to find workers. We have essentially what we call the great crew change or the great retirement. So a lot of our workers got to ages where when the oil patch slowed during the pandemic, they were out of work and said, well, we're just taking early retirement. They were forced to take early retirement. In the past, those workers were replaced by the new crop. Well, we don't have that number.
Well, we have the baby boomers are retiring.
The baby boomers are retiring. We don't have as many coming up, but in the past history of our country, we brought in immigrants on a legal basis, gave them a work visa. I mean, we built this country with immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants from Italy. We need to do more of this. Let's not bring fentanyl across the border. Let's bring in people legally who want to work.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for tolerating me.
Thank you, gentlemen. As someone who hauled a lot of hay growing up, I love that comment.
Exactly.
The gentleman from Kansas is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing outside of the D.C. Beltway, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. We're just a few short hours south of my home in Wichita, Kansas, and it's great to have my colleagues here in the Heartland. Some of the folks in the D.C. bureaucrats and inside on the east and west coast call this flyover country. But what we've seen here today, and many of us already knew, is that folks in Oklahoma and Kansas and other states here in the middle of the country are more vibrant, hardworking, dedicated, and patriotic people in America. Agriculture is a major industry, and it's these men and women who feed, fuel, and clothe our country and the world. We're also home to a lot of manufacturers. In fact, just up I-35 in south central Kansas, we call it the air capital of the world. Here in Oklahoma City and throughout the Midwest, organizations of all sizes are building planes, earth drilling equipment, ag products, and more. In 2017, Republicans overhauled our outdated tax code to benefit families, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. Our goal was to make sure we got the economy going. And in fact, it worked. What we've seen as well is that we've actually collected more taxes. So in 2022, just last year, we collected over $700 billion more dollars in taxes than the Congressional Budget Office said we would have done if we had not done the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And businesses actually paid 12% more in 2022 than they would have without the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Lowered the rates and ultimately got the economy going, which meant we collected more in taxes. And we've got the lowest unemployment rates, both pre-COVID as well as post-COVID, just because of having the economy going. Unfortunately, some of those provisions that were put in place temporarily are starting to expire. One of those that really has had an impact on a lot of businesses is the median expensing of research and development cost. It expired last year, and I'm working to reintroduce legislation that will help restore this crucial tax program so that small businesses here in the Midwest can continue expanding the research and development, creating more good-paying jobs in the United States. And this will help sure we have a strong economy and a strong America. Mr. Mills, can you tell us a little bit about the impacts you've seen of some of good tax policies on your business?
They're absolutely critical. You know, I've said a long time, just about to every elected official I can, that, you know, just get out of our way and let us grow. Let us develop new product. I mean, we want to be a leader in the world like we used to be, innovative. And here in Oklahoma, we're some of the most innovative people because we're resilient. And, you know, we know what it takes. But having the benefits of some tax, especially R&D, I mean, let's go make some new things. Let's develop. Let's be leaders again in expanding our economy. And get out of the way. Don't tax us. We're going to go out and create more jobs, to create more taxes to help fund and help people that need the help. You know, being just even an elected official on a local level, I saw where the tax dollars were going. I probably became a little bit more moderate when I became the mayor because I understood the poverty level in our communities and the people that really needed the help. Because I saw those agencies helping those people. So I know the need is there. But at the same time, you can't choke business down in order to get there. They're the people that are generating the jobs and the opportunity and the taxes. So let's look at this cycle. It's not very complicated. But those definitely have helped us. And R&D is huge. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yep. Well, thank you. And, you know, in addition to good tax policy, we need to make sure we have good energy policy. I mean, we're suffering now from rising prices, not just gas prices, but we're also seeing it in heating home and the impacts on businesses and families. And a lot of it's due to the bad policies coming out of the Biden administration to attack American energy policy. And in fact, limiting our, selling off our strategic reserve to countries like China. And then putting in policies in place like marginal wells and some of those restrictions on oil production. Mr. Bruvetti, I know I'm running short of time here, but I did want to ask just a quick question about what other policies you think would be useful in the United States to implement to help restore and lower energy prices for American consumers?
Well, basically, we really need less regulation instead of more. Between the EPA that was mentioned earlier, we also have policies that have come down through WOTUS, the Waters of the U.S., the Fish and Wildlife, where, you know, the lesser prairie chicken and other endangered species, they become deaths by 1,000 cuts. And this has become very difficult for many of us small energy producers to work. The more oil and natural gas we can produce, supply and demand, then the less it's going to be to the consumer.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to recognize a gentle lady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore. I don't think it's on.
Can I reclaim my seconds?
Yeah, you got your
I just want to thank all of you, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting us to this field hearing. I am from Wisconsin, and so I share many of the experiences and concerns that you Oklahomans have. I just want to respond briefly to something that the Chairman said in his opening statement with regard to the expiration of the standard deduction. I just want the panel to understand that the reason that that's happening is because of the construction of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The then Republican majority decided to prioritize cutting taxes for corporations, and they put in the provision that it would expire for people. And so we'll see what happens with that. I wanted to know from Mr. Mills and Mr. Jackson, I really do respect the fact that you've kept this business going for 115 years, Mr. Mills. That's very impressive. I'm wondering, did you benefit from the corporate tax cut from 35% to 21% to try to meet some of your needs? You waxed on about the inflation and numbers of other problems as bad. I'm wondering, did you benefit from that tremendous tax cut?
You know, I saw that question coming, and I actually asked my bookkeeper, and he said, well, that would have been beneficial if we were profitable.
If what?
If we were profitable. So we were just really getting by because of the costs. So we were really operating at virtually a break-even or a slight loss. And so, unfortunately, we didn't get to see the benefits of that.
Okay, so thank you for that. That's good to know. You said that you hired some roustabouts. I looked that up. I didn't know what that was. I thought you were talking about my great-grandchildren. And that seems to be a very difficult job. I mean, physically, because you say you're having to work for a shoulder issue. And that doesn't seem to be a job that even 50 years ago I personally would have been able to do. Just heavy lifting, digging ditches, holes. So when you know, so fortunately, you haven't raised, the minimum wage has not been raised around here. It's still $7.25 that you are offering, $18 an hour, which is, you know, only about 63% of the median income here in Oklahoma. How did you arrive at that? I was riding around yesterday with Uber drivers. They said, you cannot live here without a car and get to your job, for example. The housing prices are high. We're talking about men working now, I think. So I'm not going to even get into child care with you. Did you think about some sort of transportation program or housing assistance or anything, paid medical leave, any of these supports for your employees to augment that $18 an hour salary? Because after all, they can go work for Walmart as a packer and make $29 an hour.
We don't see much of that here in Oklahoma. I don't know about what the Walmart people are. I mean, everybody I talk to at Walmart are working part-time with no benefits and, you know, things like that.
There's just sort of this notion that people are just lazy and they don't want to come to work. And I'm just wondering, I mean, it costs money to go to work. And if you don't have a car, how do they get you your job? And then I've heard that the jobs are like 12-hour long days. So I don't know who picks up the kids from school. How does any of that happen? Let me ask Ms. Kant some questions here. Talk about female employment. And we've already discussed the fact that there's a very high 20% child poverty rate, which concerns the very high incarceration rate among women here as well. And so I specifically want you to talk about how the earned income tax credit maybe does or does not void the plight of workers, particularly single workers. I want you to answer that, and then I want you to also talk about child poverty in the state.
Thank you, Representative. For working families with children, the EITC, or Earned Income Tax Credit, is a powerful wage subsidy. It and the child tax credit can offset their payroll tax liabilities and additionally supplement their earnings. The standard deduction, EITC, and child tax credit are set at levels that ensure that families with children don't have net federal tax liability if they earn poverty-level wages.
Reclaiming my time, I only have 5 seconds left. I just want to say that I was fact-checked once, and I want to put it in the record, Mr. Chairman. People are, low-wage workers are taxed into poverty because of the way the Earned Income Tax Credit is structured. Would you agree with that, Ms. Gann?
I would.
All right. So I don't have much time, but I do want to make sure that, you know, that this committee revisits the Earned Income Tax Credit because it's a great program for helping people get out of poverty, if it would actually do that. So I would like, Mr. Chairman, to enter into the record that fact check. And I also want to enter into record something very disturbing to me about the incarceration rate of women in Oklahoma for child abuse. I mean, and that includes not having enough money for food, rent, and I'm very concerned that we are imprisoning women for being poor. Mr. Chairman?
Without objection,
I yield that.
so ordered, to put in the record. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, you're recognized.
And thanks for holding this hearing here. My district in Pennsylvania is an ag district as well. We have a lot more dairy cows than we have beef cattle, and a lot of egg-laying hens, but agriculture nonetheless, and then manufacturing as well. We like to call ourselves the snack capital of the world, both salties and sweet. We're close to Hershey's and Mars and many others. But I was a small business owner myself from the time I was 17 years old, out hanging drywall, and then built a small business to still exist today with several hundred employees, a regional leader in commercial contracting. So see the power of an economy that provides opportunity for people, the power of jobs to provide opportunity for people. And in fact, I ran first for the state Senate and then for Congress to really work. I'd seen the growth of government that really intruded in all aspects of our lives and made it much harder to, for a 17-year-old to run a business, and really ran to kind of fight back against that, both at the state level and then at the federal level. So I hear what you're saying, can relate to what you're saying, and I think the ranking member made a statement this morning that I think was important, and that is we should be able to have discussions about what really works best to lift people out of poverty, to help individuals achieve their own American dream. And we have differences of opinion in what is the best path forward, but we ought to be able to have these discussions. And so I appreciate everyone being here in the room talking about this. But it's pretty clear there is a difference in how we as Republicans and how Democrats approach these issues. I think we can agree that we're all thankful that we live in a country, and to your point, Mr. Mills, that does help those who really need help. And you saw that as mayor, and I've seen that in my community, and I'm grateful for that. And then beyond that, we talk about what's the best way to lift people out of poverty. And I think in general, and I'm very much overgeneralizing, some of the things you're hearing from the Democrat side today rely more on government than what we prefer to. We believe that in the power and the ingenuity of the American people. Wouldn't you all agree, and I'm just curious, the best way to help people, lift people out of poverty is to provide them with a job and to connect them to the job. Do you all agree with that? I see heads nodding.
I agree, and I was just thinking that same thing when this question came out, that the path out of poverty is a job.
So how do we do that? Well, does the government create jobs or do businesses?
We have jobs. We need to help them with skills, and they need to have some basic skills.
Yeah.
But just like been mentioned here, a lot of times we have someone with basic skills, and we can train them to do, because every company is different. We all do things a little differently, but we can help train them. We also send some of our workers then to career tech to upskill their abilities. We have one of the best career tech systems in the world, really. People come here just to study our career
I
tech
agree, and
system.
I'm going to run out of time. I want to make one additional point, and I appreciate your commitment, because it is a really important function to find ways to ensure that individuals are prepared for the jobs that are available today. Nothing better than lifting people out of poverty than that. The ranking member also mentioned the success of the American Rescue Plan, and some of us believe that created the inflation that has hurt everyday Americans in a degree that it's been very, very harmful to families. And nowhere, I think, then during the discussion of that bill was our difference in approach more evident, where the bill incentivized people to stay home, which I thought was terrible, to put people in a position of earning more if they stay home. They had to make that tough decision. I'm going to stay home so I can provide for my family. Our idea was to provide a $1,500 incentive to have people go back to work. What's your reaction to that? Do you think that would have worked better than what we have now?
I think that's a good start. I mean, we've got to get something to get them moving. And I think we I'm trying to think if that happened here in Oklahoma. But I know we talked about it. I know our governor talked about that, providing that incentive. I can't remember if it happened or not, but I think it worked because things have gotten a little bit better since then. We still are struggling to find those skilled workers, but again, any incentive we can to get people back to work, it would be welcome.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
I think the representative recognized the gentle lady from West Virginia, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member as well. Thank you all for being here today. I feel that policymakers don't always respect or truly understand what job creators, business people, go through and the risk they take every single day when they open their door, whether it's a glass door, a fancy wooden door, or a truck door. You take risks every single day, and you care about your employees, because without them, you can't do a good business. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from you on your ideas. Mr. Bravetti, thank you for being here. You know, the independent oil and gas producers are so essential to securing our American energy and our way of life. Without producers like you, it would be much more costly for Americans to keep their lights on and our cars powered. The Democrats in Congress have consistently used the tax code to discriminate against American energy producers, from attacking deductions for intangible drilling costs to propping up unreliable green energy through billions of dollars of subsidies. Democrats have shown that they are more willing to pick winners and losers. Can you explain how higher taxes on America's most abundant energy resources, like coal, oil, and gas, impact the price for our consumers?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Representative Miller. Every dollar that you pay in taxes is $1 less you're investing into your business. And in our case, our business is very risky. All ventures don't work. You're at the vagaries of Mother Nature in the sense that when you put $1 in the ground, do you get $2 back, $3 back, or do you get none back? Punitive tax codes do no good. We should be encouraged to take these risks and invest the money, and the benefits are twofold. There's benefits to the consumer. You know, the more hydrocarbons we can produce in this country, the lower the costs are going to be to the consumer. And the other benefit is the tax revenues that are going to come from that. And those tax revenues are going to come not just from the production of the oil and natural gas in our business, but from the taxes that all of the workers pay that go into the hundreds that are needed for every well that's drilled and completed.
Well, you know, President Biden, when he decided to release millions of gallons of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in a failed attempt to artificially lower our prices, how can small producers like Charter Oak compete against the federal government in pricing oil?
That's an outstanding point and a great question, because I believe the amount of oil released initially was 180 million barrels, and then I think it was followed up with another 23 million barrels this year. That's over 1 million barrels a day. To put that in perspective, that is about just almost 10% of U.S. production. So it would be it was not for any sort of national emergency. It merely affected the economy. It did temporarily drive the prices down. But even if the Strategic Petroleum Reserves are never replaced, that 1 million barrels a day of production is off of the U.S. market. So now the demand hasn't changed, so us producers have to now come up with that extra 1 million barrels a day. That is probably going to raise the price of oil to all consumers in the U.S.
And it will continue to do so. Mr. Jackson, when you spoke, I'm sitting here going, boom. I enjoyed hearing everything that you had to say. I have a very small farm near Milton, West Virginia, and I raise grass-fed bison. At one time, I had as many as 100 animals, which is pretty tiny to a lot of you. And we're down to about 30 now since I've been in Congress for the last 4+ years, because we just can't, handle what we do. I still worm the animals 3 times a year, and it's a 3-generational thing. It's really cool to see my 13 and 15-year-old grandsons finally strong enough to pull those gates when those animals are, trying to get through. Yeah. So you built your business during one of the most challenging economic times our country has faced. Have things gotten better or worse for you since you started your business? And what's your biggest challenge?
I would say our number one challenge is definitely labor, and it was challenging, and speaking of bison, that's why we had to reinforce our facility more, just so we can handle those bigger animals. It gets your adrenaline going working those, but they're definitely majestic creatures. I would say if I could offer one idea, though, for how to entice people to come to work, though, it would be to offer them hope. That's what we need as a nation, is for people to have hope that things can get better. And I think we owe it to each other to share that knowledge of what we've learned, so people can walk in the door with zero experience. They can learn some tangible vocational skills, things that we had to learn on the fly that we couldn't go to a school for, and walk away with some real skills they can use somewhere else. And that's empowering for people to have that, to know they have hope, they can make their life better for their family. And then with that, we have to coach and mentor. We have to have people grow in their jobs. And we look at it more as not transactional, but it has to be relational. And we benefit from that as a small business, to see firsthand people's lives, what they struggle with, and then help as best we can from our vantage point to make their life better.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, I do have to tell you that I processed all of our animals. I was always in there when we did it. Thank you.
I want to thank the gentlelady and recognize the representative from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Okay. And thanks to the witnesses for your testimony, to all of you for your service to our country. Mr. Jackson, in particular, one of the great experiences all of us get to have is to travel to West Point, or to any of the academies, and meet the young people that we nominate to those institutions. And I just want to say to you how much I enjoy that and appreciate it. Particularly appreciate your willingness to serve our country in the fashion that you have. Driving out here, or riding out here on the bus, it looked like I was in any part of my district. A lot of folks, have an impression about the district I represent because of my hometown getting some of the attention that it does. I'm from Flint. But most of the people and most of the district that I represent looks just like the country that we drove through. I have conversations just like this one in my district every single week. I represent a lot of growers, a lot of folks in agriculture, and I appreciate the perspective that you bring. It's an important one. I also think, the institution of Congress can do better in terms of having civil dialogue. I wax nostalgic thinking about Mr. Lucas when he was the chair of the Agriculture Committee, and how during that period of time, despite the fact that we had differences, we were able to come together on a farm bill that was good for Americans, good for the American economy. And I just hope that as we go into another year of writing a farm bill, we're going to be able to draw on that example that you set, along with our friend from Minnesota, is no longer in Congress. That's an important statement. And I just want to say that out loud, because listening to the dialogue here, one might get the impression that there is two distinct, unoverlapped philosophies of government. That's just not true. We all have different perspectives. We come from different life paths. We have a lot in common, and we ought to not allow our differences, as significant as they may be, cancel our areas of agreement. And as I said, Mr. Lucas showed that when he was the chair of the Ag Committee. I hope we can find a path forward in that same light. I would like to emphasize and ask Ms. Gantz a question. One of the challenges that we face, and I know this is true here in Oklahoma, is that our tribal nations, sometimes they tend to operate sort of in two distinct spheres. There's an impression over the last few decades that tribal nations have done extraordinarily well. Well, that's not true entirely. Some of the highest poverty rates, some of the most difficult challenges around health, around income, around economic disparity is found in Indian country. One of the things that Congress has failed to do is to create parity clarity for our tribal nations when it comes to the use of those tools of the tax code that do. I'm sorry, I guess you couldn't hear me. I won't start over. Although I could. The tools of the tax code, which is the mechanism for incentives for private investment, are not equally available in Indian country. Something as simple, for example, as the ability to issue tax-exempt bonds, the way every government pretty much finances large infrastructure improvements, which is a key to economic development, is locked away from those tribal governments. Other uses of the code regarding housing policy are not readily available. And I wonder if you just might comment on how that impacts the economy and what difference it would make if this committee and Congress could get together, as Republicans and Democrats now have expressed, and share those tax benefits with Indian country.
Well, thank you, Representative. And I agree with you. I think in any chance we get that we can put our people over politics, we should be doing that. So thank you for those words. But I think, just to be very blunt, we need to be talking to our tribal nations. We need to talk to the 38 federally recognized tribes that are in Oklahoma and listen to them and hear what the challenges are. Similar to why is our workforce not coming to work? Are we talking to them? Are we asking them what is keeping you from work? So how would that participation look for the tribes? This is a space where the United States should honor the sovereignty of the tribal nations and have good faith negotiations to ensure that all parties can agree on equitable approaches to strengthening economic conditions for not just Oklahoma citizens and U.S. citizens, but tribal nation citizens. I've got dual citizenship as I sit here as a Cherokee Nation citizen and as an American citizen. The tribes do have a huge impact on our economy, and it really has proven that when we work together, we are better. The tribes have very much, I can speak from personal experience, from the help with school supplies, the help with housing, the help with health care that we've received as from my family for tribes. It matters, and it makes a difference in Oklahoma, and there's so much impact that these tribes are having in rural Oklahoma especially. I know the Chickasaw Nation, the Cherokee Nation, they're really working to reach those folks who are outside the metros that are struggling. So I do think that we have to work together. We're all so wonderful, smart, innovative folks in this room, and if we put our politics aside and do what's best for just working class Americans that don't maybe have the privilege or the advantage that we were born with or that we were provided, then we're all going to do better.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Kustoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening us here, and to all the members who've appeared, and certainly to the witnesses who are here with us today. I think we have learned a lot so far from your testimony. If I could, Mr. Mills, and maybe Mr. Jackson, you've talked about the challenges with labor. Mr. Mills, I think you talked about the incentivizing, or maybe the decentivized from the hiring and retaining of employees, which are two distinctly different things. If I could, Mr. Mills, maybe anecdotally, can you tell the committee what you've heard from potential employees when you tried to hire them and had trouble, and maybe also what you've heard when you've had challenges retaining those employees?
You know, one of the problems is getting them to come to an interview, just showing up. I mean, that's, you know, you go out there and advertise or work with Indeed or whatever, and they make an appointment to come, and they just don't show up.
You have an opinion why?
No. I wish I knew, because, you know, you have this, the job is clear, the pay is clear, and they just don't show up. And then, you know, you try to get a hold of them, and they just don't answer.
Okay.
So I wish I knew. I don't have the answer for that. But, you know, so you just continue to, we'll just keep going until you find someone that does show up. And I don't have the benefit of that knowledge.
You had those challenges before COVID. Those challenges have been exasperated after COVID. Is that fair?
That's fair to say. We had some of that problem before, but it's gotten way worse. And I don't know why. I wish I knew the answer if we need to do something different. I don't know what it is personally. So I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Mr. Jackson, what are some of the things you've heard as either you tried to hire employees and maybe they don't take the job or they won't show to work, and also about retaining some of those employees?
The hardest thing, I think, and I share in that same frustration, is people sometimes have someone else come pick up an application for them. They don't return the application. If they do come to the interview, they don't show up on their first day of work. So there's a series of challenges that we have leading up to someone starting on their first day. And I think that's attributed to just a lack of desire on the part of people to put the work in that's needed to actually show up to work. And we've even had some employees that they've left on their own accord, they've quit, and then a week later I receive a call from the organization asking about SNAP EBT benefits because the person says they were terminated instead of quitting. So I deal with that often, in addition to issues with child support of delayed payment because of a lag, and those agencies knowing where people are. And so I handle a lot of paperwork in terms of helping them try to play catch up with that. So there's a lot of different things that we deal with that are outside of the actual production of work.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson, and thank you for your service to our nation. Ms. Payne, if I could with you, I'd like to follow up maybe in a different way from what Mr. Lucas asked you, and that's about waters of the U.S. You testified about that in your testimony. You're speaking to the nation as this hearing is being broadcast. You're obviously speaking to people who live outside of rural America. Can you talk about, from your standpoint as a rancher, as a grower, what the practical, pragmatic effects of the waters of the U.S. would be if implemented, how that affects you and other ranchers and growers?
Thank you for the question. I can speak specifically to our operation. Our southern border of our farm, ranch, is a river, the South Canadian River. Easiest place in the world to find. Most people drive by it on a regular basis. I'm in Oklahoma city limits. We have a ditch in the front of in our yard. Now, it's dry. When we flooded, which is what brought us out of the last drought over 10 years ago, water everywhere. It will affect everything that we do. From spraying, which we haven't been able to do, low-lying areas, our soil has changed during this drought. It changes every time. Water will stand where it wouldn't have stood before. There's nothing good that comes of this, in my opinion.
Thank you. My time has expired. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I'd like to recognize the gentle lady from New York, Ms. Tinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. This has been tremendous. And I just want to follow up on something that Mr. Hearn said. He said that how many people talk about things they don't know about. And I want to add that as a small business owner, how many of these people don't even try to find out the answers? And so I thank the chairman for doing this and hearing directly from you about what your issues are as small business owners and the struggles that you face. And my business was started 77 years ago by my grandfather. And we have similar issues in New York. But I will tell you, if you want to know about killing prosperity, the story of New York is how one-party Democrat socialist rule destroyed the state of New York. And I say that for a reason, because this isn't the days of Reagan O'Neill that we once enjoyed as a country. There is a certain element in New York State, particularly, that's hurting our country and hurting our state in terms of regulations. And I agree that there is a middle ground. We do need, and the mayor, thank you for saying this, we do have to care for the truly needy people in our communities. That's an obligation we have, and it's something that we all have a mission to do. But there is a middle ground between, are we helping, hurting, and are we hurting our small business owners and our taxpayers? And so I like when you said, when you were asked the question, how are your profits? That is a huge question in New York. Most of us don't have any profits. Boy, would I love to have profits. The only problem is when you get profits, you issue dividends and you get taxed twice. So that's something that I haven't had the joy of experiencing. But I wanted to just go back and just ask you a little bit about dealing with some of the issues as an employer. And I wanted to actually start with Mr. Jackson and go down the line. We really appreciate your service. West Point's wonderful in New York. My son's a Naval Academy graduate, so I appreciate the rivalry, but wonderful institution as well. So thank you so much for your service and honorable service. But, you know, in terms of small business, you mentioned something, and this is something that when I go back to whether it's entitlements, one of the issues we face as an employer is many of our employees are boomers who are coming back to work, and many of them are already getting some kind of public assistance. So they're asking us to actually pay them less or to get less hours so that they can continue to work. Is that something that you're facing in your business, Mr. Jackson?
I'm sorry, could you phrase the question differently just so I can understand what you're asking?
Yeah, are you having employees come in that don't want to work as many hours and are reaching a limit where they would not be eligible for some of the entitlements they may be getting? Maybe in case of seniors who are collecting Social Security, don't want to impede or impinge on their Social Security, or other people are receiving other types of benefits because they don't want to get to that level.
Absolutely, we've seen that.
Okay. Any about Mr. Mills with your organization?
We've seen the same thing, and you know, my greatest. I have people ask me all the time. I'm at retirement age, and they say, "When are you going to retire?" And I said, "And do what?" I like what I do. I'm not going to just sit home and die. I have to be doing something constructive. My greatest fear is the employees that I have that have been with me 30 years, and I have many of those, 25 and 30 years. I'm really more worried about them retiring. So I'm doing all I can to work with them to keep them. They are my brain trust. And so these are concerns because you have to, I'm on, I've had to already apply because I'm 66, I'll just tell you. But
you don't look it.
Thank you. I'm concerned about my employees really facing those same things of not being able to make as much money in order to draw their Social Security. And so it's a concern, and it should be a concern for a lot of people in the workforce because these are people we depend on. They have so much experience.
Thank you. I'm going to reclaim my time for it because I want to save a question for Mr. Bravetti. All great witnesses, but Joe Biden said in his State of the Union address that we only have about 10 years left of fossil fuels. I'd like you to address what that would do to the economy since there are a lot of taxes on gas and other things that fuel our economy, run our infrastructure, our transportation. But also, would your community benefit most from a tax credit to help buy an $80,000 luxury electric vehicle or from policies that reduce gas prices? Can you kind of hit those two-sided question there?
Well, I'll address the first question about Biden's 10-year comment. Even the most liberal energy policy group, which I believe personally is the International Energy Agency, okay, the IEA, I think they show us using almost the same amount of oil in 2050 as we're using today. It kind of continues to rise, little peaks and drops. So oil is not going away. Its products are used in so many things besides for transportation, tires on vehicles. Natural gas, of course, has so many other products, fertilizer for our farms. I don't see us running tractors out of anything other than diesel. And if you're going to mine lithium and strategic metals, that's all going to be done with equipment that's going to be using diesel most likely. So I don't see that going away. In the aspect of renewables, when the wind quits blowing, which it occasionally does in Oklahoma, you have to immediately come on with a backup power supply. So for every megawatt of wind, you've got about an equivalent megawatt of natural gas combined cycle turbines that spool up. So that's not going away. To the aspect of your second point on the electrification
Tax credit for an $80,000
Yeah, tax
luxury.
credits for the $80,000 bills. Yeah, the people who buy those are wealthy. They don't need a tax credit. And, you know, in much of the country, the world will electrify and is, but in much of the country, it's not there yet. You know, you couldn't drive across the state of Oklahoma, not even to mention states like
Thank
this.
you all very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
Mr. Snyder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Neal for this opportunity to talk about the state of the American economy and how we are trying to help American businesses flourish and the American economy continue its strong growth. I also want to thank the witnesses for offering your testimony on what workers and business owners need to thrive in this modern economy. Many of the things we have talked about today are echoed with what I hear from my home district in Illinois. And personally, I'm excited to be here in Oklahoma. Much of my father's family traced their roots to this state. Having worked on a horse ranch in Colorado 40 years ago, it feels like coming home to be in this building. I only wish we could have been here longer, had time to explore and learn and understand both the challenges and opportunities that the hardworking people of Oklahoma are pursuing and do much. That said, we all talk about government spending. And I wonder if spending a few hours in a rather cold room without time to actually tour the area or to meet and speak with directly with the people is our best use of public precious resources, of taxpayer funds. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record an article from the New York Times talking about the impact of these roadshows on committee budgets.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And Mr. Mills, I started my career in the oil and gas industry back in the mid-'80s, early 80s, doing accounting software. I very well understand the boom-bust cycle. I remember the bust of 1986. I wouldn't want to ever experience that again. And, you know, that was, I would argue, one of the toughest times this industry ever faced. But I later spent much of the last 30 years afterwards working with private business, advising mostly family businesses. I know that only 1 in 3 family businesses make to a second generation, 1 in 10 to a third. The fact that you're still in business after 108 years is really extraordinary and to be celebrated. And I wish you, or 115 years since 1908, a lot there. I also know from my experience that there are 4 key factors that businesses depend on for growth. One is a business model. Government has no role in that. That's up to each of you to decide the best model. But beyond that, it's access to talent, it's access to capital, and it's a stable business and political environment. Businesses thrive when they can make long-term decisions, to make decisions into the future, confident that they're not going to see the pendulum swing, in particular in government, whether it's at the State House or in Washington. That said, we also hear, and everywhere I go I'm hearing about the challenges with labor. You all have touched on that. Every company I talk to, small, medium, large size, high-tech, service industry says we are having a hard time finding people. And this is something we've seen over the last more than 2 decades, a decline in workforce participation and people coming there. There are things we can do. We need to educate our workforce. We need to make sure we have workers coming up. And I think the government does have a role in that. In particular, I applied in my district, the community colleges. Lake County is one example that is working very hard to do that, but we can promote that training. In the coming days, one of the bills that I've been working on and we'll reintroduce is the Veterans Entrepreneurship Training Act. And Mr. Jackson, thank you for your service. My son is a Navy veteran. I represent Naval Station Great Lakes, so every recruit going into the Navy comes from my district. So I'm in every way possible a Navy dad. Our bill codifies and expands the successful Boots to Business program offered by the Small Business Administration. This is a program that provides entrepreneurship courses to people coming out of service, transitioning back into civilian life. And I'm proud to be working across the aisle with the Small Business Committee Chairman, Roger Williams, in introducing this, and across the Capitol with Senators Durbin and Ernst in the Senate. So, Mr. Jackson, I'll turn to you. You served our country heroically. You came back. You're working in your community. You're making a difference. You've talked about the ups and downs, both personal and in business. And you're working as a career coach with Veterani. Can you share a little bit about your experience, what you've learned, and what you wish lessons you could have been provided along the way, and how some of the challenges the veterans you're working with, what they face and how we can better support them.
I appreciate that question. I know we're short on time, but there's three things I would want to highlight there. One is I wish I had known when I was transitioning that there were more things available for people who wanted to start a small business. Most of what we were told about was vocational type training that was available. So I would recommend maybe in partnership with the VA, maybe working with different ways to allow veterans to know what's out there, either vocational training to be a good employee or to start a business so they know what tools are available to help them succeed outside the military. Another way might be to have small business loans that would help with operating capital through SBA. That would be another helpful way. And then we also have existing organizations that do a great job, Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, things like that, that are in place right now at no cost to veterans that are very helpful.
Great. Thank you. And again, thank you for your service.
I want to thank the representative. Recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Mills, as a father of 4 boys, 10 and under, I want to say how much I appreciate your comments about participation trophies. And wondering if you'd be interested in a Little League coaching job in northern Utah, by any chance. I appreciate that, and I like that sentiment about labor. I commend my colleague from Wisconsin for asking a very skilled and somewhat risky question to one of the majority witnesses. I'm going to do the same risk by asking a question to the minority witness here, Wisconsin, and hope to see, I appreciate Mr. Mills' candor and hope the same from you as well. Would you say that you are at least, supportive of a 2017 provision that doubled the child tax credit?
I would.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks. So my point with that is, the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I was way on the sidelines, nowhere near Congress at the time. And I saw it, and I didn't know all of what to think about it. I wasn't dug into the details on it. It didn't fix a lot of our spending issues, but what it did was grow our economy. And is any bill in Congress perfect? No. But that bill grew our economy, and it strengthened, I believe, the American workforce. And what we've seen since then, and I remember saying this when I was on the campaign trail in 2020, which was not a fun time to run for Congress. Hopefully it's the only time I ever have to first run for Congress. But as COVID was starting and ramping up, I remember saying to folks, we have the bones of a strong economy and we'll recover quickly from this. And I firmly believe that the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act was a strong reason why we were able to bounce back, right? We had Republican majorities with the White House in 2017. Democrats had the same in 2021. We do our priorities, right? And we try to get things done. We have a sincere effort, right? I obviously, lean towards a conservative point of view, and when those majorities existed, that's what my focus is on. But we right now, as a committee, have an opportunity to do something that I appreciate Chairman Smith's focus on, and that's small business. And many of these tax provisions are set to expire, have already expired, and we're working on figuring out what is the most important thing to do and what do we need to do to make sure that you all, many of you small business owners, have what you need to thrive. So I'd like to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, a statement by Darrell Wilkerson, the owner of Wilkie Manufacturing LLC in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, describing how soaring costs, supply chain issues, and labor shortages have severely hurt small businesses' ability to operate in today's economy.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I have one simple question. I'm going to ask all of you to respond to it. What would you have us focus on with respect to making sure that your small business could thrive? What is one, maybe 2 things, just topically? We'll dig into the minutia of the tax provisions and all that. But what would you have us focus on?
I'd say being a new business, the biggest help we could have is probably better access to operating lines of credit for our cash flow situation. And then beyond that, just help us feel more empowered so that we can focus on helping our employees grow and bringing in and retaining that top talent. Not worrying about how to pay our bills and things like that, but instead focusing on how we can make other people's lives better, the people that we bring in the door, and help them then impact the community.
Coach?
Yeah, I raised 2 girls, so I didn't have to worry too much about little league stuff. So it might be kind of new for me, although I have my first grandson, so I may be getting involved in that. Thank you. You know, everything, again, for me, focuses back on workforce. And because that's kind of what I've been involved in for a long time. And, you know, anything that you guys can do to continue to support the Workforce Act, you know, that is good federal dollars that come down to the states and actually go help people upskill, you know, and relocate. You know, if they're dislocated workers, they're able to be relocated into jobs. But that is one of the great programs I think that continues to work here. So I would encourage you to continue to develop those programs in workforce.
Thank you, Ms. Payne.
Yeah, just in watching the time, I'd mirror their comments, but also just minimal regulation. Let us work, let us create, let us prosper.
Ms. Brevy.
Agree with the other comments, and you know, please let us deduct our expenses when we spend them. You know, let's preserve the IDC.
Ms. Johnson.
I would dig into the barriers keeping people from work. What are we doing to get them to the job, and are they jobs that are going to be able to pay the bills?
Thank you. Thank you all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Steele.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for this important field hearing to learn more about the state of American economy. Thank you for our guests for taking time away from their busy jobs to discuss how they have been dealing with the economic downturn for the last 2 years. I represent Southern California. California farmers and other small businesses have been facing supply chain issues and port delays, raising production costs, including higher expenses for fertilizer and fuel, mega drought, and now unusual weather events. My congressional district has a front row seat to the port backlogs, which at its peak witnessed more than 174 idling and anchored ships off the Southern California coast. I introduced the Supply Chain Task Force Act would create an interagency task force to immediately work on addressing the backlog, and this was included in the NDAA. I want to ask Mr. Mills and Ms. Payne. Many families-run businesses in my district have shared the concerns with the future of their businesses. California progressive regulations have made it difficult for them to succeed. I always tell everybody, whatever you do exactly opposite of what California does, you're going to be successful. What obstacles are you currently facing and expect to face if we stay on the current track?
If we stay on this current track, we're going to survive, but we're going to be impaired, and it's going to be difficult to grow. You know, this I just can't explain how painful the price increases have been, and how hard it is to sell product, and especially worldwide to sell that product. You know, and again, all this to me still goes back to workforce, because everyone down the supply chain has the same problem. So to me, it's really simple about supply and demand. You know, we have still great demand, but less supply. So the prices are going to continue to go up. And despite the Feds continuing to raise the interest rates, the pain has evidently, pain threshold has not been reached yet, I suppose. But we're going to see continued problems here because of these escalating prices. At some point, we're going to hit that tipping point where my customers are going to say, I'm not paying that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, then things are going to stop. Things are going to crash. And that's where I see us going.
Ms. Payne?
Thank you. The farm that we are so proud of, that's been in our family for 5 generations, is not good for anything but what it's being used for. And that's growing grass for cattle. The portion of the farm that's certified for agritourism is on a bluff, and we could actually grow something there, fruits and vegetables. What we're seeing, though, and what concerns me, We provided a food source by growing crops for fruits and vegetables with this agritourism venue so that there is fresh, wholesome food in our community. If people can't afford to buy that, doesn't matter if we grow 70,000 acres of it. And that's a real concern for me with the cost of everything. I mean, my input costs are going up. We all shop at a grocery store. And what happens when we can't afford to put food on our tables? Doesn't matter what I grow. I can't give it away.
Thank you. Related to that, I hear a lot of about workforce shortages from my constituents. How can we, the future generation, develop skills and succeed in the workforce? And how are we going to bring them back? Because, right now they're always asking for flexible hours, more money, and they're not ready to work. I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about those people that we try to interview and try to bring them in. You know what? I'm a first-generation Korean American. I used to work 18 hours a day, and I still work 7 days a week and more than 12 hours a day. So what challenges are we seeing, and then how to fix it?
I appreciate that you mentioning being Korean American. I had many classmates from West Point who were first-generation immigrants from Korea who were representing their family well with a lot of dignity and honor.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I would say there's two things as a veteran that I learned that would help people be better empowered to be better employees. One would be discipline, and the other would be extreme ownership. So with discipline, it's seeing the job through with quality and consistency. And as far as ownership goes, whatever you see, you own. And as a business owner, I've learned that everything that goes wrong is my fault, either failure to communicate or to train my people. Anything that goes well is a result of them doing a great job as a team.
I want to thank the gentlelady.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that, Ranking Member. Mr. Hearn, Mr. Lucas, thank you for this opportunity to be here in Oklahoma in your state. I appreciate that. Again, my name is Jimmy Panetta. I come from the Central Coast of California, where we do have a lot of beauty, as you can imagine, but we also got a lot of bounty. Agriculture is my #1 industry in that area. In fact, with redistricting, I actually gained the largest cattlemen's association in California in northern San Luis Obispo County. And then, of course, we have our specialty crops. So I am hearing a lot of the same concerns today that I hear in my district, obviously, especially when it comes to water and workers. Now, I got to say, we don't hear much about oil and gas in my district. And when it comes to regulations, let me just tell you, the people in agriculture in my state would think of Oklahoma as Disneyland. Okay, let me just make that clear. All right, so take that for what it's worth. Now, obviously, when it comes to the two issues that I hear most about from my ag people, water and workers, technology's playing a big part in that. Obviously, with water, we're seeing that when it comes to recycling and recharge, and even desal to a certain extent. And when it comes to workers, it's obviously trying to replace not labor, but the lack of labor. Now, be it COVID or pre-COVID, that's always been the #1 issue, especially with my specialty crops, and how difficult it is to replace the human discernment when it comes to actually bending over, looking at a strawberry plant and deciding what is an aesthetically pleasing, safe, ripe, and clean strawberry, and then actually taking the time and technology to pack it in a clamshell. Technology is just not there. So you need humans to do that type of work, especially right now. Maybe one day we'll get there, but not right now. Now, fortunately, we have people who are willing to come to this country and do that type of work. So let me tell you, no American is doing that type of work. We're just not doing it. And therefore, we need the same people that have come throughout the history of this country to come here, to contribute here, to work here, and to ensure that basically we continue to go forward and be that #1 agriculture, not just state of California, but #1 agriculture producing nation in the world. And so obviously it's this reliance on foreign workers to do that type of tough work is what it's come down to. And so I was wondering, I hadn't heard much talk about that in your lines of work. I mean, do you have foreign workers who are coming in and filling those tough jobs that no Americans are willing to do? Mr. Mills.
You know, we do. And, of course, I see more of it in the construction industry around me. And I actually have a friend that runs he's construction and he does lawn care and things like that. And he has mainly Mexican workers. But they all come in legally and, send money home and whatever. But, personally, I think that we need to bring more immigrant workers in. Legally is the key, though. I welcome them. Hey, if you'll come in and be productive citizens of our society, pay your share, welcome. Open the doors.
Right. Mr. Mills, are you familiar with the H-2A system?
I am.
Okay. And would you encourage an increasing of that system?
I would. Okay. I think it's a good program.
Right. Thank you. And then, Mr. Jackson, obviously, in your line of work, you rely on foreign workers?
We do not, and most of our work is done by hand, so I would be in favor of anything that would help increase automation to better train those employees, but also to help us be more efficient as the large packers are able to do.
Understood. Thank you. Let me just pivot over to Ms. Katz. Obviously, Mr. Schweiker alluded to this in his questioning in regards to some of the issues keeping people out of work, and that being opioids. As what has cost, I think, now it's 80,000 lives in 2021. So, Ms. Katz, when it comes to opioids, I know that in my district, they want to increase access to medication-assisted treatment, specifically buprenorphine, also known as Suboxone. I know a lot of my doctors have asked for that. How does access to that medication-assisted treatment impact communities in Oklahoma, including the workforce?
I think any time we can help our workforce access care, any type of care that they need, I don't think it's our job to regulate what care they're getting within a doctor's office. So I think anytime they can access that care, we're supportive of it. And I do believe that there's some mental health pieces there that need to be lifted up, that there's a lot of, there's a lack of care in Oklahoma specifically around opioids and substance abuse.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. Recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Feenstra.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I want to also say thanks to Congressman Hearn and Lucas for having us here in Oklahoma. It's quite an amazing state. I also want to thank our witnesses, and your testimony is very impressive. In 2017, we passed a significant Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and it affected virtually everyone in the Heartland. And when I talk about the Heartland, I talk about Oklahoma, I talk about my state also, Iowa. We are the breadbasket to the world, and it goes somewhat unnoticed. I never hear from President Biden about all the food that we're creating and that we're exporting, and yet we do it and we work hard and we're very happy about doing these things. In that Tax Cut and Jobs Act, Section 199A allowed farmers and small businesses to take a deduction up to 20% of their qualified income. This was very significant. It allowed small businesses and farmers to compete on the global stage. And so, Mr. Mills, I want to ask you a question. In your testimony, you noted when you're able to negotiate lower prices for materials, you pass these savings along to your customers. How about when the government helps and gives you a tax reduction? Is that the same thing? Does that apply?
Yeah, I would think it would apply, and it's, to me, of course, my best investment is my business. So any advantage I would get would invest back into my business to hire more people, develop new product, and, that's how we would, use an incentive like that.
So what you're saying is it goes two ways. So when you lower taxes, you can either pass it on to your customer or you can grow your business as an investment. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair. And the statement I was making there was, as we see, it's actually interesting that almost everything's gone up with our bar material and tube material. Just recently, we've seen a reduction in steel plate. And so that's a big part of what we buy. So we're going to readjust our pricing back down to make our customers more competitive. If things go up, they have to share the cost. If things go down, then, we go down too. We don't just say, oh, we're going to make more money.
That's exactly right.
We don't look that way.
Exactly. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Mills. Ms. Payne, as you know, you're part of the farming community, just like I am. In Iowa, 9 out of every 10 farmers are small business men and women. We're either LLCs, partnerships, sole proprietors, S corps. We're not big corporations, right? We're small. So how does, when I start talking about tax reduction, 199A, where you get a 20% deduction on your qualified business income, how does that affect you? And by the way, it's going to go away. It's shocking, but in 2025 it's going to sunset. So how does the uncertainty affect you when you see something that you have today, but it's going to be gone tomorrow?
That's a very fair question, and I think there is more and more of that. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times, especially in cattle industry, we're working for one paycheck. We will get that check once a year. And so, but we're always looking further on down the line. Like right now, I don't have anything at the house, but I'm planning for 3 years from now, hopefully we'll have pasture about what I can stock that place with. Within that planning is also going to require some financial management. So we like to be able to count on certain things. I can't discount my livestock. It's not a cash sale like that. But I want to be able to plan to be able to buy an overhead bin or any of the tractors, any of the things that I would need.
Taking away from that, Mr. Mills, if you could further expound on that. Right now we have a thing called 179 depreciation, which you can fully depreciate an asset in 1 year, a bonus depreciation the same way, but that's going to go away. It's going down from 100% to 80% to 60%. So when you buy capital equipment, and all of a sudden now you can fully depreciate it, but it's going away as this year it's gone, or it's slowly going down. How does that affect you? If I had a guess, that would also affect your future decision making.
Well, first of all, you have to have some cash flow to make that happen. That's number one. And right now, because of what we're having to expend on buying additional materials, we're not even looking at buying anything equipment-wise. We're really just pulling back and going, okay, let's see what happens. Because, again, our best investment is to go out and invest in those materials, controlling that cost, make it competitive for our customers.
Thank you. See, I just want to note to everybody, that's what inflation does, by the way, people. Just what he said. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I'd like to recognize the gentle lady from New York, Ms. Maliotakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll say as a New Yorker and Yankee fan, it's exciting to be here in the birthplace of Mickey Mantle. When we talk about Made in America, we are talking about you, right? American manufacturers, American farmers, food producers, American energy producers. And we have a president who talks a lot about Made in America. But what I'm hearing today is that the policies, there's a real disconnect between what he says and the policies that are coming from this administration. Because what I've heard today is that higher taxes, burdensome regulations, permitting delays, the disincentivizing of work have all made it more difficult for you to create jobs. It's made it more difficult for you to create American jobs, let's be specific, and produce more American goods, forcing us to rely on foreign countries, particularly as it pertains to energy. And I want to focus on the energy policy because we rely on energy for everything, to manufacture, to transport goods and food, to have a quality of life where we can have electricity that's reliable. And I'm from New York City, and sometimes in New York City we don't always think about where that energy comes from, right? We just turn on the lights, we pull up at the gas pump, we go in the store, we buy our food. We never think about where it's actually produced or how it's produced. But lately, my constituents are paying a lot more attention because they're getting those higher utility bills. They're seeing that, gas prices are more today than they were 2 years ago. And they're seeing that, that transportation of food is actually driving the price of their products up at the supermarket. So I'd love to ask Mr. Bravetti if you can comment on how much more is the potential for American energy production here in Oklahoma and America. How much more potential is there for us to be energy independent and, as you said, not rely on adversaries? It's important for our national security, it's important for our independence, and it's important to reduce prices for American families. And my second question would be, how are Biden's policies hindering that production and, in the end, increasing the cost of energy and food for my constituents back home in New York?
Both great questions, and typically we recover about 20% of the oil in place. We maybe get a little bit more on natural gas, 50 to 75. So we're leaving a lot of hydrocarbons in the ground, and technology will help us recover those. So it's not going to go away. We're going to be able to develop that, and that's going to be able to help the consumer. From the standpoint of your second question, what can be done? I mean, one of the things is pipelines. I think your home state has blocked pipelines going through them, and we have such tremendous gas reserves that are in the Appalachian area. And so that gas has to come here. That gas comes through, and Oklahoma gas has to compete for space in the pipelines, whereas that gas could go to the East Coast and be made into LNG, sent overseas. It could be used to heat the homes there and help people flourish.
You mentioned something interesting. When you mentioned pipeline, I automatically thought about the Keystone Pipeline, right, which would have created thousands of jobs, including here in Oklahoma. How is the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline affecting American workers here? And how is it also sending a message that disincentivizes private investment to expand the energy industry here?
Well, it did all that. It was a job killer, as we were, the cancellation of the Keystone. It also kind of slapped one of our best allies, our closest, our neighbor to the north in the face. There was so much investment done. This was a way for Canada to be able to market their products to a place where they have a product, we have consumers. And I will point out that there is not a safer way to move oil than in a pipeline. I think we've seen what's happened with railroads here lately. A lot of oil gets moved by railroads, and that's not safe. So, yes.
Is American energy, or American oil, I should say, is it dirtier than Russian oil or Venezuelan oil or Saudi Arabian oil, Iranian oil?
That's a good question. Without getting down into the weeds, most of American crude being produced right now is what's called fairly light and sweet. It's low in H2S, which makes it sour. It's also fairly light compared to those countries you mentioned, such as Venezuela. And when you produce crude in a foreign country, it's not produced as clean and safely, but now you have to move it on tankers, and that has a carbon footprint for sure.
So American oil is cleaner, and it's costs less to transport, and it's cleaner to transport.
Cleaner, safer, and nobody produces hydrocarbons in a more environmentally and greener fashion than U.S. producers.
Thank you.
I want to thank the gentlelady. Recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member as well for having this bipartisan hearing today. I think it's great to be in Oklahoma. We had a great time in West Virginia. I want to follow up on a couple of issues as it relates to energy, following on the questioning. But looking at Oklahoma, and I know that Chairman Lucas and Mr. Hearn have pointed this out as well in your testimony, but there were $64.9 billion in the state's gross domestic product that came from the oil and gas industry, $2.5 billion in taxes, 27% of Oklahoma's state's GDP comes from the oil and gas industry. 16.7% of the state is tied working to the oil and gas industry. The other thing that you mentioned briefly in your testimony, but I think it's important to note, that over $2 billion $2 billion will return to property owners in terms of royalties. It's major. The other issue is that for every one oil and gas producing job in the state of Oklahoma and for the rest of the United States, there are roughly 2 other spinoff jobs. So why did I want to put out all those numbers? So while we were going through the testimony, I wanted to pull up the top oil and gas producing states. And they're not red states, they're not blue states, they're red, white, and blue states. Texas is number 1, New Mexico is number 2, North Dakota was number 3, Alaska was number 4, Oklahoma was number 5. And we saw what a big portion of Oklahoma's economy is derived from oil and gas production. Number 6 was Colorado. My dear friend across the aisle, you'll be surprised, California was actually number 7. Wyoming number 8, Utah number 9, Louisiana number 10, Kansas 11. My state of Ohio with the Utica Shale reserves, we're making the charts up to 12. And then, of course, following with Montana. What we have seen, of course, is that oil and gas spin-up jobs are domestic. They grow the economy. And I think in your testimony, you mentioned that there was, you had positions up to $100,000 that you just can't fill. The other thing I want to point out is part of oil and gas, I'm a firm believer if something's not grown, it's mined. And so if you look in terms of what does that mean for oil production, there's a lot of moly that goes into that. Barite goes into that. Phosphate mining goes for fertilizer. All of these, and they have an average income of about $85,000 for every one of those people that mines those products. So, saying all those things, one other thing I want to point out to my colleague here to the left mentioned the price going up. Some interesting numbers. In December of 2020, dollars per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. Listen to these numbers. December of 2020, $4.11. Today, or in December of just a couple months ago, $8.23. It's doubled. So we have a misguided energy policy, and I'm so glad that we're here talking about the things that are really affecting the American public. I'm going to ask you a question just real quick on the oil and gas side of things, if you don't mind. Because I like many of Mr. Hearn pointed out, people that don't know a lot. I come from the energy production side of things, my private career. Can you explain, and I think you mentioned in your testimony, but you explain the percent depletion and how that relates to smaller oil and gas producers and why it's so important?
Yes, certainly. I'm not an accountant, I'm an engineer. However, we depend upon our participants who co-invest with us. They depend upon certain things, and we mentioned about the IDCs, which is the intangible drilling costs, but there's also a depletion allowance, and there's cost depletion up front, but there's also percentage depletion. So percentage depletion, which I think has been in question and has been on the crosshairs of some people. Percentage depletion, if you think about it this way, when you plant a crop one year, you can go back and replant it next year. But with our industry, what we pull out of the ground this year is gone. It's like you had a closet filled with some type of asset, and you make them gold bars, and you were making bitcoins, right? You were pulling them out. They're not there once you pulled them out. So that's what the depletion allowance addressed.
You're constantly using your asset.
You are using up your assets. At some point, it's gone. So the depletion allowance, I view it as not it's not a handout. It's saying, hey, wait a minute, what you had to start with, you don't have anymore. So we're going to let you take the deduction for that. You know, you're selling off an asset.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I want to thank the witnesses again for your testimony and for being here. I want to thank Express Ranches, Express Clydesdales for hosting the event. I want to thank you, Ranking Member, for your attendance, and I want to thank every member for your attendance. These field hearings, I believe, are a great way for us to get closer to different areas of the country that we typically wouldn't see when we're in Washington. And so I appreciate the time commitment that each and every one of these 24 members took to be here. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned.